There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Hope everyone is enjoying this morning. And yeah, we were thinking about taking class outside since it's so nice, but the screen probably won't work out there. So today is California Day. And I'm really pleased to kick it off with today's keynote from Mike Anderson. I think most of you know Mike and know about Mike, but he is the California State Climatologist. He's part of the executive team for the California Department of Water Resources. He got his PhD from UC Davis in civil and environmental engineering, and doing work on hydroclimatic modeling. And so he's in a good spot. And for me personally, the most important part of Mike is that he had calculus from my dad at Colorado State University. Yeah. At any rate, we're excited to have Mike do today's keynote, and it's always spicy when Mike talks, but it's spicy during a spicy time. And so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
All right.
All right.
Here we go. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. One, it's fantastic to be up here and be able to see you, get to spend a day with folks I really enjoy interacting with. My new world in executive is a place I understand I need to be. It's just a place where I get to learn a whole new way of thinking and working. So based on all of that, I'm going to share with you thoughts on information I would like to convey to folks in terms of what we need to understand to get through this adventure of a warming world. And so away we go. Boom. All righty. So the narrative of climate change, and this, are all the boogeymen hiding in the closet, right? Warmer temperatures, greater variability, more extremes, more rain, less snow, longer dry season, rising sea level, ecosystem changes, dogs living with cats, ... But what does this mean, right? I mean, it's great to say all these things, but how does it manifest itself, right? How does this come into being? Warmer temperatures is pretty easy. I think we've discovered that in July. It can be really, really hot. The sneakier one is when every day is about 2 degrees warmer than it used to be. It's sneaky. Don't really notice it, but the landscape does. And that's why we have to figure out what we need to put some evidence behind this to help us figure out how we navigate our way through it. In case you haven't noticed, the last decade's been kind of interesting, and been some indications that, yes, things are changing. So here we go. The world is warming here in California. This is all observed data. This is no projection. This is what has happened. We have 1901 to 1930, dawn of the 20th century. Dun, dun, dun. Our mean temperature was back around 56.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Average precip for a year in California, 23.7 inches. Right in a state where we have parts of the state that average about 2 inches of rain per year and parts of the state that average over 100. But means right around 23.7 back then. And you see all the circles that are the 30 years that make up that normal. Not too far from that blue triangle. So the mean representative of any individual year, pretty much. Got a few extremes. Got 1924 sticking out there like a sore thumb. But most of them right around there. So now let's fast forward to the normal we're working under right now. This is the 1991 to 2020 normal. We've warmed about 2 degrees Fahrenheit already. It's in the books. Done. About 1 degree Celsius. Average precip, 23.6. Essentially the same thing, right? On average. Again, in a state where geographically, there's probably somewhere that has that average precip, but we find, though, that each individual year now, not so close to that diamond, right? So if I'm predicting average, I'm already missing by more than I used to. So I don't have to do anything different than I used to be doing, and I'm behind on an annual basis. And look at my new extremes. My coldest extremes, 1998, get the ones a little closer to average precip there. But we're only back around where the average used to be at the dawn of the 20th century. Everything colder than 56 degrees Fahrenheit, we don't see anymore. And in fact, if you take the whole distribution of temperatures over the period of record, the bottom 10% of values haven't been experienced since 1956. So how much changed? So this is great. This is one of the things climatologists love to do. We do departures from normal. Okay, 1981 to 2010, we do temperature departures for the state from normal over the time series. Blues are below that average value, oranges are above. Holy cow, look at how much warming is there. All right, new normal. What happened? Well, you took 10 years of that really noticeable warming. It's part of the average now. So hidden within that average value is warming. That the ecosystem, has it adapted? It's in the process. Have we adapted as humans? Work in progress. But our reference date that we're using is in there. And we're on our way again, moving towards 2030 when we'll update it again. And in this case, we'll have 20 of the 30 years in this space. The need to adapt is picking up steam. Are we getting there? So everybody says, well, you know, it's just a walk, right? We're just going to walk up the hill in warmth, and it's just going to slowly get warmer and warmer. And no, this is a nonlinear system. It does really interesting things. Again, last decade's been a nice primer in that. But to try and get this point across, using the minimum temperatures, 1934, what a freakish year. Temperature that stood out from all others for decades. The year you talk about, once in a lifetime kind of thing, right? For that generation, maybe. Get to the 80s, all of a sudden, started happening a couple times a decade. Became episodic. Wonder what's going on. Well, since 2010, every single year has passed it. It's become commonplace. So what was once an extreme is now common, and what's the new extreme? And what are we building to? How do we understand our frame of reference versus what we're experiencing, and how do we use our tools in a way that makes sense of this and can give us the information we need to be functional? I use this one for water managers to say, hey, if you felt like the last decade's been hard, you're right. Because our water management rules work really well when we're in the expected zone, right? 40 to 60 percentile of the distribution. All the rules are written for that. Right around average. And everything's fine. Theoretically, we'd find most of our values in there. Well, maybe at the beginning of the 20th century, we did. In the past decade, we did it once in the Godzilla El Nino of 2016. Okay, so it wasn't as horribly dry and horribly warm as the preceding 4 years that were record-setting drought years. But it wasn't the return of Godzilla, and we had the whole discussion of Godzilla versus the blob, right? The blob being ocean heat anomalies or ocean heat waves. And it really is the introduction of a concept of, I built my whole understanding of the climate system thinking I can measure sea surface temperature and I've got it. I have all the information I need. But what happens if the heat content of the first 300 meters of the ocean now is vastly different than it used to be? Climate system runs on heat, not temperature. All the old rules of thumb may not work. We're racking up a lot of anomalies or extremes. And as a manager, anomalies, you may have a playbook to, okay, we got to do some things different. Extremes, we rely on emergency measures. But if you're doing emergency measures 3-4 times a decade, how soon does the public say, do you really have your act together? So there's more than the physics here. There's also the optics in the world that I live in now, is how to help them understand this. We still go around the sun the same way. We still have spring, summer, fall, and winter. All that feels the same, kind of. There are elements of it that are feeling a little different. But getting them to understand in the fundamental actions of how we get through managing not only water, but all natural resources. We're either extending the playbook or we're needing a different set of rules. But how do we communicate to folks that the reason for the different set of rules is Mother Nature's playing by a different set of rules? And pretty soon, we're playing Go Fish and Mother Nature's playing poker. It's not going to work. But annual values are great, but that's not enough information. That's not enough to go on. This is a great chart from Scripps. I love this thing and really do hope to get this to be operational. And again, this is looking statewide. So it's again averaging over the whole state, but Kirsten did this also for each of the climate divisions. Well, water year 2022, warmest 10%, right? What happened in May? We had daily values that hit the bottom 10% of the distribution. If you're growing a crop and it's at a critical point in early May, and you get cold damage in one of the warmest years in history, how do you explain that? If you have the data at the right resolution, at the right frequency to catch what's going on. It's not just warmer, it's more extremes. And understanding when there's more energy in the atmosphere, Mother Nature's got more power to do things. And it's important to remember there are places in the atmosphere on the planet that still have a lot of really cold air. Also on there is that Labor Day heat wave that we thought, holy cow, that was awful. I don't think we're going to see that. Oh, whoops. Hi, July. Yeah, it's episodic, and we're on our way to common. So now let's talk about ARs and the big ones. This I thought was kind of enlightening. So water years 20, 21, and 22. Holy cow, 3 driest years on record. Boy, that must have broken a long ago record. Oh, 2013, 14, 15. Shoot. We're hitting the boundaries of the distribution that leave you trying to figure out, what are we going to do next? What can we do within the rules we have to figure this out? But here's some pretty interesting insight. in 3 years, wasn't a complete absence of big ARs. In 22, there was that October AR. Hallelujah for it. Because we came off the second driest year in the period of record. We missed 24 by mere 1/10 of an inch. Did anybody bother to notice that? No, it's just a drought. Why are you having problems? Had that, get a giant storm. Oh, everything's going to be better, right? Oh, we're doing so great in the fall. Oh, wow. January 22 to August 22, driest 8-month start to a calendar year on record. More extremes within the year. Then 23, yeah, winter in 3 weeks. And I'm not far off. Our average winter, we get half our annual precip. In these 3 weeks, we had 46% of it. We had 86% of a seasonal snowpack show up in those 3 weeks. We also had more strong and extreme ARs in those 3 weeks than we had in the previous 3 years. The big ones make a difference. But think about that. Making or breaking a water year depends on our ability to manage the biggest storms of the year. How are we going to do that? I have some ideas. But now let's go a little deeper. I love this slide from 2017. This comes from Ben Hatchett. He's moved on to fire weather, which is all right, but I really enjoy this because this was, as he put it, the subtropical symphony of winter 2017. Some rather challenging conditions. And this is for the Feather River watershed. And so we see just a parade of atmospheric rivers and 2 families of ARs that led to some pretty big flows that had some consequences to them. But I want you to look at those little yellow circles. That's the freezing elevation. One of the biggest keys to what's happening in the watersheds of the Sierra Nevada is that freezing elevation. I can tell you the average freezing line or the average snow line for the year, and can tell you that it's sneaking up the watershed. But if we're managing the biggest storms of the year, it's understanding what's happening by the hour. And look what's happening as the warm front comes through and the AR comes through, and that snow level shoots from 2,000 to 10,000 feet. Then the cold front comes and it drops back down to 2,000 or 1,500 feet. If I have daily data, is that enough to get through this? Can I manage my system with daily data? I'd kind of like more information, please. Well, let's think about what we have in the climate system. I have annual values. I feel pretty good about that. I have seasonal values. I feel pretty good about that. I have daily values. Well, we've got daily values since the 80s. Okay. Done work, got a pretty clean data set. Feeling not too bad. Sub-daily data? Oh, that's messy. I don't want to go there. Sorry. But I better, because that's what's needed. So what do I need? Well, here's step one. I need a reference state, right? I can tell you all the wonders of ARs, but this is what was missing. First step has been made. We've got the base catalog online with some basic information. I've got the time series of count per year at each latitude dot there. I've got the monthly distribution sorted by size, so I can see what months the big ones show up. They do have a preferred point in the season, which makes sense. That's when our AR activity is the strongest as we get closest to the solstice and start moving back towards the equinox. And it's after we tip. and start moving forward. Also, the same reason why August is the warmest month of the year. It's after the tip and we move. Think of it as a wave breaking. But look at the directions. This is what I love, the windrows of where the ARs are coming from, because I've said this is one of the biggest keys. This is one of the biggest challenges for meteorologists to kind of wrap their heads around. The land surface matters in California. The land surface and the atmosphere work together to create our weather. Fundamentally, this is how water arrives. But we have to understand the direction, latitude, and strength, and understand how that comes together. And like I said, here's the first step of understanding just about strength of AR and beginning to understand how many and how we characterize them. And then understand what our expectations of change, right? What happens when we get a 3 sigma event? What if we get the boundary event like winter in 3 weeks? There had never been a 3-week stretch with that much IVT coming ashore in this time frame back to 1950, which is a pretty long time period. So what do? This is what I use to try and explain, and I'm happy to have feedback and saying, well, I don't know if that's going to get the job done. But what we want is we have to manage water in real time. It's how much of the water coming by are you managing? What is your managed volume capability? Because you have all the fools saying, why didn't you manage the water? Well, there's a boundary in how much you can manage. Anything above it's hazardous. And you're managing to minimize hazard. Below the line, you're actually working to manage to benefit. You need information and tools that help you increase that managed volume capability. Because we're dealing with boundary events, things we haven't seen before, the rules of thumb don't work. At the core of that ability to raise that managed volume capability is research. We need really bright people to work with that can help us navigate, develop emerging technologies that we can adapt and adopt. And it comes in 3 key areas. Observations, what we're looking at, what information we're pulling in to help us understand the state of the watershed. Not only what it is for the year, but what it is for right now. That's not enough. I need to know what's next. That's where forecasts come in. How do I take tools that help me understand what's coming next? Because I understand where I'm at, what's coming next. I now have a game plan I can build. Is that game plan over the next 5 days, the next 10 days, the next month? Through the wet season, through the dry season, through the transitions. I can have the coolest observations, and I've got some really cool things I could show you. Without explanation, they're just pretty pictures. I can have a really cool forecast that every observation falls within the range. It may not be useful, but it qualifies as a good forecast. What makes observations and forecasts work is turning them into information that you use to make a decision. Those are the key tools. Letting me know state of the watershed. Where are my risks? Where are my opportunities? What can I plan for next so that I'm managing as much of the water coming by as I can and putting it to benefit? And in doing so, I'm minimizing hazard. This doesn't happen by itself, though. There are 3 keys that work on this. First and foremost is communication. This group knows that. It's what we live on. It's also communicating with the folks that get to make the decisions for us. helping them understand what's needed, what helps, what doesn't. Collaboration. This is really important. There was a really strong push in the 90s about competition, us versus them, and the other, and it pervaded the academic community in a horrible way. Pervades a lot of aspects of government to this day. If I'm getting money, they're not. Us versus them. They're like, no. If we're going to survive this, we have to get to collaboration. We're going to work together to find our way through. And if we're collaborating, we better be coordinating so that we're in step. We have the right information at the right time to make the right decision and put the best foot forward, not only managing water, but managing resources. Because fundamentally, water is the foundation for everything else in the state. The landscape, the trees, the wildlife, the food, and the economy. It all starts with the water. So building the water year, you've all seen this. I've used this each year as I give you my best guess of what's going to happen. Right? What do we look for? Well, obviously we look for when does the wet season start? We know it's supposed to be October 1 in Crescent City and Halloween in San Diego and somewhere in between along the way, right? Boy, it'd be great if Mother Nature stuck to that script. Unfortunately, not so much in the case. And in our expectations, a longer dry season means maybe it stretches into November. But what happens because of that? We lose over an hour of daylight in October. Sun angle starts really moving. High elevations cool off, and they don't get enough sun to warm up. So what happens when the first precip is snow instead of rain? The watershed's not wet. There's a tax to be paid on your snowpack right from the start. 100% snowpack's not going to be 100% runoff. I can hand wave to that, but if I don't have a way to understand soil moisture state, snowpack initiation, it's hard to get people to pay attention. Because their first question is, well, how much? I can tell you if you get me the resources to get the information to you. The temperature anomaly. Boy, these are fun, aren't they? Going through some there this week, right? This is September. Remember when September, you couldn't bank on a 100-degree day being there? It did happen in my lifetime. My kids were going to have a hard time believing that. Because it's not so much of theirs. Winter, the big three, right? December, January, February. I used to say, is it wet or dry? Subseasonal variability. When is it wet? When is it dry? Because when it's dry, it's no longer, now we're in the cool season, the wet season, and everything's just going to be wet. It's now wet and dry, and when it's dry, it's drying. The landscape is becoming dynamic. It's not going to sleep for the winter. Now, this is happening at the 2,000 to 4,000 foot elevation, right? But that's a really important band of elevation in a watershed for its function. Notable anomalies. Winter in 3 weeks, then a month off. Oh, by the way, up before that 3 weeks, you only had a fifth of what you would have expected to get started on a wet season. Really dry start, big extreme. How much water comes that quickly? You get flooding, just how it goes. Then it goes dry. Then it does something it's not supposed to do, right? It got cold and we put snow in places that hadn't seen snow in a generation, including putting snow on Angelinos. They were not thrilled. So understanding anomalies, and it's not just the building of the snowpack, it's the evolution of the snowpack. Because if we go back to Ben's plot real quick here. Sorry, I hope this doesn't make you too woozy as I try to figure out where I'm at. There we are. The gray line. Yeah, over the winter season, it's going up, but if you look really closely, there are times where it's dipping. And that's going to become more common. Is that it's not a smooth rise like the average value shows on the snowpack plots. It's becoming more jagged as we rise and fall. It's more dynamic. What does that mean? We need information to track at the time and space scales needed. Spring, late season bailout or early shutoff, right? March miracle. Isn't it funny how 1 year sets an expectation? Now, understand in March of 1991, things were pretty grim, right? You're in year 4 of a drought, and you're at that point drier than the driest year on record, and things are not looking good in the choice metrics. Then half of the year's water shows up in a month, and all those hard questions got a lot easier. But then all of a sudden now, oh, it's dry. Well, wait, we got to wait for March. Got to wait for March. As if it's always going to happen. These are the perceptions that I'm working with now. These are the conversations get to have. An understanding of the peak snowpack timing and magnitude, right? Because go back to that narrative. Well, it's just getting earlier and it's just getting smaller. No. It might be smaller, but peak might be after April 1. And again, what that peak is and how much runoff comes really depends on a lot of factors. So how do we get that narrative to have a little more depth to it so that we get better? And now the really key one. As we move through spring and into summer, it's not just the wetting, it's the drying. The dynamics of the landscape as it dries out. And it does this in a really interesting way because this now involves the vegetation. And it's not, again, a monotonic slide into the dry season. The longer it goes, we just slowly run out of water. There can be a fantastic set of circumstances that are just perfect for plants to grow like mad and consume a whole bunch of water. Bit of a bummer if they're in a shallow soil region that consumes all the water in that growth phase really quick, right before it gets hot. Oh, no more water when I really need it. Oh, what happens? Oh yeah, they die. So how do we track that? How do we do it? There actually is some information there, and it's kind of exciting to see if we can develop that, but really understanding how that happens and how that informs the risk in the watershed. Heat events, that's enough said on that. We've all experienced it. Now the fun one, tropical activity, right? Used to go decades without any tropical systems impacting California. We're 2 for 2 with Kay and Hillary. There was a hint of one possibly next week, but it looks like now it's going to go visit Los Cabos and then wander into Mexico. But this time of year, the winds are slack that move them off. And if it's wandering just offshore far enough from Baja, that opens the door to Southern California. And yes, there is enough warmth now where that can be a thing. Now, everybody gets to April 1. This is your favorite question, isn't it? April 1, I got a pretty good game plan for this year. My game plan's better if I know what happens next year. That's a work in progress. But the good news is it's a work in progress, right? More informed I am about understanding not only the cadence of this year, but the cycle that we're in. And then more fundamentally now, how much different is this decade going to be than the one before it? Give me some context, where I am in this space of change. If I can get that, I begin to have enough of the tools to find my way through this. All right, so the fabulous roadmap. After the adventures of 2021, things didn't work. We had a really dry fall. We had some snow. But remember, 21 was the second driest water year in the historical record. It was also the driest and warmest spring in the historic record. What's a great way to ruin spring melt? Dry fall, dry spring. 100% snowpack doesn't equal 100% runoff. But in this case, it doesn't even follow the relationships of any of the years of history before it. Well, obviously, that means we're not doing our job right. All right, no. It points out we need to keep pace with Mother Nature and better understand state of the watershed. So I wrote a framework. This is how we do it. This is how we get there. 14 objectives. It's there on the snow.water.ca.gov if you choose to read it. Working on getting annual updates that talk about what we've accomplished, what are our risks, including budget risks, which might be why the update is still in review, is finding the right language for that. But we're on, we have it. We know our path forward. We have a framework to operate under. We can speak to it. Now we got to make it happen. First and foremost, start with the communication, letting people know we need to be able to understand spatially what's going on. 2023, one of the wettest years the state has ever seen. Unless you're in the northern part of the state, and after the 3 of the driest years on record, you only got about average. Guess where we're starting to see drought impacts creep back into the state? Those northern counties. Because they've had 2 average years to offset a record dry 3-year stretch, and that was the 3rd multi-year record-setting drought in the last 15 years. In a landscape of volcanics that rely on pressurization of watershed. That takes a while to recharge after you've dried it out. Understanding spatially what's going on. Where are we wet? Where are we dry? Where are the risks? Where are the opportunities? So we have the California Water Watch. Great way to get pictures to start telling this story. Whole bunch of areas to show how we measure data, show what we know, what we don't know. To begin to tell the tale. This is still a work in progress, but at least it's started. This is a way to communicate, a way to show the value of the spatial information, the importance of it, why things aren't working out to the narrative that you're just hearing with the annual values. It's also a great place to begin to highlight some of our collaborations with some of our partners who can provide some of this information. This tells the story. Here's 2023, beginning of December. Record lows in reservoirs. This is looking like year 4 of a drought. This is just getting ugly. April 1, well, if you're from Marin County south and west of the deserts, hey, you cashed in. How much of it you managed? Well, depends, right, on what our capabilities are. So this help you pay attention to those northern counties, far north of the state. They participated in the driest 3 years, but they didn't participate in the wettest. Key spatial information. This is preaching to the choir here. But what I want to ask you this is how do we get better at telling this story of why this is so darn important? Fundamentally, this tells me a lot of information I didn't have. I went from index-based information, a space where reliably knowing that much snow was enough. But now the patterns on the landscape and the watershed are changing. And that value doesn't have the relationship to the watershed it used to. But spatial information tells me this and so much more about the state of the watershed. It's not just the snow. This is not only for water management, this is resource management. And that's where the value argument comes into play, is that this is how, again, water is the foundation of everything in California. If you don't get this right, you get nothing right, because your foundation isn't solid. Critical information. With this, I can do things. I can manage to all that Mother Nature's throwing at me. Without it, I'm putting on a blindfold and hoping for the best. Careful where you walk if you're not able to see. What happens if I don't have data? I have models. And I want my models to be as good as they can be, because they can help when I don't have the data. This is some partner work I'm doing with a group called Earth Knowledge, kind of an interesting bunch of former USGS scientists, some folks that used to be in the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy in the White House. They're a really interesting group of people. But they're working on the same problem. How do you take spatial information, in this case, the landscape? How do we understand this compelling story? Now, why do I show May, June, and July of this year and a little footprint there up by Chico? Remember what I said about growth conditions being really good and then it gets hot? Well, it just so happens, if you look at the footprint of the Park Fire, its fastest growth was in a fractured basalt segment of the watershed. Shallow soils, not much storage, but areas where grasses can grow if the conditions are right, and spring was right. A model that can kind of help me track this in vegetation and soils. This is the complement. But again, in this case, I don't have as much data, so I'm relying more heavily on my model. Give me a state, but it's taking it and making it useful information. How am I ready? Where are my risks? Where are my opportunities? And how do I make use of that? A couple more I want to share. How many people have heard of AQPI? What a lovely acronym, right? Advanced Quantitative Precipitation Information, or as one of the supervisors in Sonoma County put it, oh, AquaPI. Okay. Scientists and then the folks I get to work with now. This is actually a chance to put this into practice. The Doppler radar system, that is the foundation radar system for our nation and stalwart of the National Weather Service, works like crap in the Bay Area. One of the most economically important regions in the nation is not served by the National Weather Service. Whoops. But we got to have a one-size-fits-all in the Weather Service. Fine. Give me a federal foundation and I'll get a state customization. We're building a state customization of gap-filling radar, X-band radar, which is really cool. We get much better precipitation information in the 10 Bay Area counties now. Better understanding of how these systems are coming on shore. coupling it with forecasting, in this case, high resolution forecasting, to the point that you can manage storm water systems, particularly those that are coupled with sewer systems that occasionally spill into the bay and lead to very big fines. Doesn't take avoiding too many of those to get a value proposition. But at the same time, this is the foundation of what we're trying to do. Give me the right set of observations. Give me a federal foundation, but I need a state customization that enables local implementation. Give me a forecast that lets me know what's coming. And put it into a framework where I can make decisions, in this case, on water management, coastal bay flooding, and be ready. So I minimize the economic disruption to one of the most economically important areas in the nation. This is a model, this is a pilot. But how do you take the key elements of this and then replicate it for what's right in every other part of the state? And let that be the model for the nation moving forward. What's right for our federal partners to provide a foundation? What needs to be done at the state level that's a customization appropriate for the state that enables local implementation for success? How do we build it, maintain it, and thrive with it? It looks like this. We get it all right. We have an integrated observing system of land-based radar, airborne and satellite information, all working together, letting us know the state of the watershed, both the surface and the subsurface. We couple that with our modeling that gives us an understanding of how much water is where and when and what's coming next. This allows us to take our infrastructure and our management capabilities, put them to their best use to maximize our managed water capability, minimize our hazard. And in the places, that means giving people enough time to get out of the way, because you're in a place where there's no way to get away from the hazard other than to get you out of it. In which case you need lead time to execute the maneuver. All righty, well, I've yammered enough at you here, so we'll finish up. Warming world, new and more frequent extremes. Guess what? They're going to keep going. This isn't the new normal. This is the jumping off point. This is only the beginning. It gets worse from here. That's a given. What do we need? We need to understand elevation is really important in California. Fundamental. Leverage the knowledge. We know it. Let's put it to use. Spatial variability is important. Let's know it. Let's put it to use. Resolution impacts our ability to identify change. I can come up with all kinds of observation papers that say, I don't see any change. Doesn't mean it's not happening. It means you don't have the right observing system. Because all of us have lived through enough to say things are changing. And a person says, I don't see it, is a person not looking in the right direction. Frequency of observations important to detect change and identify impact are mission critical at this point. Get the right cadence of the observations, and how do I work with my models to help me understand that state of the watershed and its evolution and what comes next? I also need to help people understand the reference state. Because it used to be a static thing. It's no longer a static thing. It's moving. That doesn't mean the past is lost. It just takes a different place in my reference state, my understanding, and how I work from. But it also gives me a motivation of how I better get moving, because my reference state is moving. And if I don't move, I lose. Plain and simple. So how do we adapt? It's not a single thing. It's a pathway. What happens on a path? It changes. It goes up, it goes down, it twists, it turns. I need a variety of tools in my toolkit to get through this. And I can't just say, I've got one, I'm done. I declare victory. All done, all good. No, I need to keep going. I need to keep working to know what's going to help me evolve in my toolkit to help me get through. And the better I communicate, collaborate, and coordinate, the more success I will have. I know how to do it. That part's not the mystery. It's just getting the right pieces in place to get it done. And I'm hoping that we get there. All right. Thanks. Questions? Oh, by the way, this is that October 21 storm. Record low pressure off of Aberdeen, Washington, meaning the Columbus Day storm is no longer the lowest sea level pressure observed offshore in October.
Here, microphone coming to you.
2 periods of record and showing the scatter around the two means. It's more than just the scatter. There's like a giant halo around the second mean.
Exactly.
Nothing approaches the mean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Predicting the mean is a way to guarantee you're wrong.
So Dr. Anderson, you took the sail out of a question I wanted to ask you, but I
Sure.
forgot what on the communication. So what is it that or more important, this group of professionals, the experts, need to do to alleviate the resource development issue, the funding, however you want to describe it? So I find it unfathomable that the individuals, when you started your discussion, you talked about your executive team members. I'm going to see what I can get away with here. Those individuals will go out and expound upon the climate change and so on and so forth, right?
Yep.
But do they believe what you just talked about? And so and I hope Tom Painter invites me back. He's going to take exception to this, but this group's bunch of Packards compared to building new reservoirs. This is cheap.
Yeah. This is a gimme win.
It's all up. There's no downside. So what is it I need to do to assist in this?
Need to make it clear that this isn't information just for water management. Because with that narrative, you have a group of people who believe users pay. If you like it, pay for it. This is so much more than water management. Water is the foundation of every activity in California. You would think that would be self-evident by now, but it's not. So we need to carry that message. We need the information, the pictures, the graphics, the stories that explain.
Follow up, speak a little louder, you and I were I was on for a very short period of time with committee on getting some resources to do some analysis of the satellite at a Doppler radar.
Yeah.
They needed like $10 million here, so we put $1 billion satellite up. But they didn't come up with enough money on an annual basis to process the data.
Yep.
I looked at it. One county alone could justify that. So the insurance company stepped in and said, hey, wow, this is valuable. You spend billions of dollars a year, this is something. I would think the insurance companies would be in this room here right today. Is that fair?
It's fair. And it's finding the right voice, the right conversation to have. I used to think it was the science that was the challenge. No, this is the easy stuff, right? As hard as it is, this is the easy stuff. The right conversation with the right group of people that begin to carry the day for you, for the information needs that make this possible.
How does that group of people get assembled?
That I'm still working on. I'm trying to learn as fast as I can, but it's having the right word at the right time with the right person that opens the door to let you have that conversation. Because a lot of these groups, you don't just walk up to the front door, knock on it and say, hey, listen to me. Doesn't work that way. You need to know a friend who lets you in the side door. You have that conversation that makes them say, I need to know more about this. Let's talk. Those are my favorite words nowadays, because that's when I can have the meaningful conversation. And you start watching perspectives change. The problem is one person doing this, the time frame isn't going to work. Mother Nature's going to win. If the last decade's shown us anything, we got to move with a little more quickness. Unfortunately, government is the one thing that does not move quickly unless it's a catastrophe. Trying to tell them we're got the tools to avert catastrophe. And not only that, but thrive. But for them to understand that, they have to understand this is the foundation. Build a solid foundation, everything else can go from there. Without it, house isn't going to stand. So it's not just me saying it. It's a chorus. And it's finding the right group of people that can come together. Again, I'm new in this world, understanding whether that's Aqua, whether that's a different group of people that have a voice that people pay attention to in the world that I run in now. Not all of them are paying attention to me. Some of them pat me on the head. That's nice. You laugh, but that's exactly what I get. And I say, okay, I'll be back. Circumstances won't be as comfortable. So help me find that course, bless. Use all your insights, all your connections, all your knowledge. Let's start building the course. Let people know this is not just water. This is the foundation of California.
One way in which government does move quickly is cutting funds.
Yeah, we're really good at that. We're really good at trying to declare victory and moving on, right?
Right.
Let's
go in the other direction. That's harder.
Climbing the hill is the challenge, but you do find your way to the top. There's some pretty good opportunities and views.
Yeah.
As long as the lack of oxygen doesn't take you out.
So one coalescence point that we're starting on right now is a value of information study, and we're working with a collaborator at Sandia and also looking at another entity to complement that, and that will ultimately involve all of you in being interviewed. And really bringing to bear what we started back. When was that? I think in 2018, we did an initial effort at a value of information study. But it was quick and it was really trying to address the May revise, I think. And,
yeah.
And then SB 487 as well. And so we're taking a more deliberate approach now to try to get this this value of information study done and to see it penetrate all the way from not just snowmelt generation and runoff, but all of the tentacles of that through to the state economy and to lives and to the ecosystem.
Yep.
So be on the lookout for that and for us pointing them to you as the sources of that information. And more broadly, I think we're going to need to see more entities who can speak to that value.
Yes. Yeah. And one last thing I'll say, keep talking to me. Share your stories with me. Because the stories are the way that people start listening. Because it's not what can be, it's what is, what's going on now. And those tend to be the things that get people to begin to care. So.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it.
All right, if people can start moving back into their seats, we'll get started here. We have a very special guest who no one has ever seen or met, standing right here. All right. Yep.
All right. Now to really kick off the California thread is Ramesh Gautam, who is the manager of the California Cooperative Snow Survey Program Unit, the new California Snow Groundhog, and also he's managing the ARSS, otherwise known as the ARS. So Ramesh, you're wired up?
Yep.
Ready to go? Okay. And you know,
Yep.
Molly showed you the dance. All right. Okay, great.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Ramesh Gautam. I manage California Cooperative Snow Survey Program. I'm from California Department of Water Resources. Today, I like to briefly talk on California's aerial remote sensing of Snowpack program. First of all, I like to go through some of the items that I like to cover. As you all are aware, California Cooperative Snow Survey Program has deep and integrated relations with the ARSS program. Therefore, I like to spend some time to go back to the history. And then I like to spend some time on Department of Water Resources Climate Resilience Forecasting Framework. And then I'll talk about ARSS program, especially for this water year, and then our plan going in water year 2025. And then I will finalize my talk with some summary and thought. Dr. James Church, who was born and raised in Michigan and had his education from Germany, who came to University of Nevada at Reno, sometimes in later in 1800, he pioneered a tool called Mount Ross Sampler. He devised that tool back in early 1900 and he started measuring snow. And of course, since then, we started measuring snowpack using that sampler, and each and every state and federal agencies, they started since then. And back in 1917, at that time, California Engineering Department initiated statewide measurement of snowpack in collaboration with all the state agencies and other partners. And at the same time, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, as well as Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, they started measuring snowpack within their watersheds. They wanted to optimize their hydropower generation. And ultimately, in 1929, California Cooperative Snow Survey was established. And this year, it is 95 years old. It is pretty old, but still, we have been working with all the agencies to collect those data, which are very vital for us to manage our water resources. In California, we have more than 260 snow courses, which are scattered throughout Sierra Nevada mountains, all the way in the south from Corn River watershed to north in Klamath River basins. Majority of those are within the jurisdictions of national park and national forest. As you can see, US Forest Service, they measure about 86 of those courses. Pacific Gas and Electric Company, they measure about 50 of those. Southern California Edison, they measure about 22 of those. Sierra Snow Survey, of course, they measure about 20 of those. And in Department of Water Resources, in the Division of Flood Operation, we take care about 6 of those, which are off of Highway 50 and Highway 80. And our Orville Field Division, they handle about like 12 of those. And all in all, we work with more than 55 agencies throughout California to collect those data, quality control, disseminate, share and exchange, and use those data sets for our snow melt and water supply forecasting. As you can see, those folks, they manage this program. Now I have been working with Andy Rising, who manages snow survey and water supply forecasting unit. We both coordinate with all the agencies throughout California. We provide them logistics, equipment to our agencies, as well as we provide them training, and we collect those data and we conduct our snow course maintenance as well. As Dr. Anderson just talked about the challenges that we have in California because of climate change, you can clearly see warming climate leads to more rain than snow. And of course, the snow lines are rising continuously, and it has additional challenges in our winter flood frequency and impact to our flood control reservoir. And also there is impact on our wildfire to our watersheds. That has other impacts into our vegetation pattern, and ultimately impact to our precipitation pattern, like going through subsurface. So because of this impact that we have been experiencing, we have been continuously working in directions to incorporate those into our models. Of course, we started working into this area since a decade or so. In Department of Water Resources, as you are all aware, we use statistical-based multiple linear regression model to issue seasonal snowmelt and water supply forecasts from our 24 watersheds. Those models are still pretty good when water year is normal. But however, when water year is extremely wet or extremely dry, such as water year of 2012 through 2016, which was drought years, and 2020 to 2022, or wet water year, for example, like 2017 or 2019 or 2023, these equations cannot incorporate those extremes. Therefore, it is necessary and vital for us to develop new technology, continuously working into these directions to test those models to our watersheds. As you can see, all of our watersheds are unique by themselves. One model cannot directly fit into other. Because of that, it is necessary and vital for us to continuously collaborate and work into that directions so that we can catch up those extremes into our models and we can have a better regulation. Therefore, we have been already working into these directions from developing those climate resilient forecasting framework, and recently we adapted that policy in 2023. So in that framework, as Dr. Anderson mentioned already, we like to transition from index-based modeling tool into physically based, climate informed, and especially explicit model that will help us to catch and capture those extremes. And also we like to create an integrated platform that will help to easier visual representations of the observed conditions to our watersheds. And there are 3 specific areas that we like to work: observation, forecasting and decision support, as Dr. Anderson just recently mentioned. On the observation side, in California, especially those weather stations which were built back in 1960s and 70s, and which are now operated and maintained by Division of Flood Operations, most of them are within the jurisdictions of National Forest and National Park. And back then, when they built, they did not follow engineering standards. And they are pretty old. Because of that, the safety standard is really low. Therefore, it is vital for us to replace and modernize all of those. Not only that, we need to add additional sensors, such as soil moisture sensors, fuel temperature sensor, fuel moisture sensor. That way, we can obtain those data to better understand ongoing dynamics and changes between surface and atmosphere. So we have already started working into this direction. And in order to do that, we have to work in different front and different areas. In California, we got to comply several environmental compliance laws and policies. For example, California Environmental Quality Act. And at the same time, since those stations are within the jurisdictions of National Forest and National Park, we need to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act as well. So in order to comply those, we have to go through several rounds of studies. For example, biological study, wetland study, and archaeological study, wildlife study. We got to complete that before even like starting to design and build those weather stations. And fortunately, we have already started working to this direction. Recently, we completed several studies for those stations which are within the jurisdictions of Tuolumne National Forest. And we're working with Stanislaus National Forest to complete those studies. And at the same time, we're working with Division of Engineering and getting those agreements and contract for design and construction of those towers and weather stations. And at the same time, it is vital for us to test those instruments and also sensors in-house. Therefore, we need the new facility. And we have also done some progress on that as well. And by doing this, what we like to do, we like to develop a special explicit that data collection system which can collect data from different sources such as radar and satellite. And then we can compare all those data to make sure that these are quality control. And we have redundant data where we can compare and verify on a real time. And we like to augment those observed data to inform the state of the watershed for situational awareness. And on the forecasting front, it is vital that we innovate new methods and tools to incorporate those changes by developing conceptual, physical, and mathematical models into our watersheds. Those models such as ISNOVAR and WorkFido. Of course, we have already worked and done some progress on that as well with the collaboration with ASO Inc. and with our universities. And in addition, it is necessary to better understand the changes into sub-seasonal to seasonal and long-range forecasting, as Dr. Anderson mentioned just before. That helps us to visualize down into the road and also to improve our forecasting. And ultimately, we like to augment capabilities to use collaborating with Army Corps as well as National Weather Service for our emergency response as well as in order to conduct real-time services to our agencies. On the decision support side, we like to develop multi-platform such as station, airborne, and satellite systems and architect the forecasting display system which will help us to support the emergency response. And at the same time, we got to advance our data management system in order to effectively maintain the reliable data source. And ultimately, the goal is to provide those products and services to our agencies. That way they can rely upon us. And also we got to be transparent. Therefore, we need to have a lot of background data and method and methodology that we like to capture. And in order to do that, we have this timeline where we started even before 2021, and we are in the process of initially implementing this. And as we move, we'll continuously evaluate and evolve and update our framework. And in order to achieve those framework, of course, we have a lot of agreement working with various entities. For example, with ASO Inc., the first agreement, of course, this is after formulating with ASO Inc., that is the first agreement that we started back in 2020. Our current agreement, it expires next year, but we have already started conducting our background study in order to renew the agreement. We have additional other agreement with university system, such as UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, and UC Berkeley. With UC Berkeley, we want to do some innovative, we want to develop and innovate some sensors and test those in the field condition, and then deploy to our weather stations in order to capture those data. With UC Davis, we have been working with them to better identify the impact of the climate change into our upper watersheds. That way, it will help us to better understand what is going on up there. Aerial remote sensing of Snowpack program, it helps us to achieve some of those goals and mission of climate resilient forecasting framework. Of course, this program started back in 2013 with the agreement between Department of Water Resources and NASA JPL. Back then, the first agreement, it was $1.2 million. And then first flight was over Tuolumne river watersheds. That was in the April of 2013. That agreement went until 2015. And there has been like seven rounds of agreement that went all the way from 2013 to 2019. We spent about $7 million. And also we expanded our study area from Tuolumne to Merced, to San Joaquin, to Kings, and Kuya. That's how we did back in 2013 to 2019. And we continued our program in 2020 with the funding from FCO grant and Proposition 1E. And then in 2021, of course, we continued this and made this program alive by funding sources from various sources, such as General Fund, FCO grant, and there was some funding came back to DWR from NASA JPL. So we continued that in 2022 with General Fund and unused JPL fund. And in 2023, for the first time, we got baseline funding, which is $10.75 million. Because of that, we were able to acquire 65 flights in 2023. We spent $13.47 million to have our flights over 13 watersheds. And in 2024, this water year, despite the budget cut, we are fortunate to have support from our federal agencies, such as Bureau of Reclamation, as well as local agencies, such as Yuba Water Agency and Friant Water Authority. And altogether, we were having 48 flights for this water year over those 12 watersheds. And in addition, of course, we are getting the product from ISONOVAL model that we have been getting for those watersheds. And we have our DWR in-house ISONOVAL model where we run that for all of those watersheds, and the WRF modeling product for those specific watershed as well. And altogether, we spent like $8.29 million for this water year. This is the picture that I like to show you, like how many flights were funded by which agency. You can see clearly DWR funded 36 flights, Bureau of Reclamation funded 8, and Yuba Water Agency and Friant Water Authority, they funded 2. And of course, there were 2 flights funded by Bureau of Reclamation grants. So altogether, there were 48 flights. So this is the another version of the same story, but the color showing that number of flights funded by different agencies. As an example, the blue flights are funded by Department of Water Resources and green are funded by Bureau of Reclamation and so on. And also it shows when we flew, for example, over Tuolumne, our first flight was in the last week of January, followed by our second flight that was in the last week of February, followed by our third flight that was in the first week of April, and followed by our fourth flight that was in the first week of May. So we were able to acquire 4 flights for this year over Tuolumne. And over Feather River Basin, we have been conducting pilot studies since last 3 years. And first year was back in 2022. And this was the year that we submitted the report to State Water Project. And these are some of the snapshot of the results that we submitted to them. As an example, over here in upper right corner, you can see the blue line versus other lines. And blue line is the watershed-wide snow water equivalent that was obtained from ice snowball model. And other lines are like point and stations data obtained from various stations within the watersheds. And you can clearly see the difference. And this clearly tells how valuable this program is. It can capture and we can obtain spatial variations of the snowpack from the watersheds that helps us to better understand which portions of the watershed has more snowpack versus which slope, and how that impact of the melting that has impact into various water balance components. So therefore, this program is very vital and critical for us to better understand and also manage our water resources. And this water year, our plan is to acquire several snow flights, and of course, we have already completed few snow flights over Trinity and San Joaquin. And our funding for Trinity came from Bureau of Reclamation, and for San Joaquin, Department of Water Resources paid for that. And we like to extend our study area a little bit to other watersheds in order to capture other areas. As you can see, back in 2023, we had a lot of snowfall, and we like to kind of be prepared and get those areas as well. And also, we are conducting and working with the ASO in several fronts in the research and development projects. These are some of the topics of the R&D projects that we have already started for this summer and fall. As an example, like we like to improve data assimilation system. We like to improve our post-processing. And also we like to better understand the model physics and land characterization and incorporate that into warfighter model. And our objective is to implement those research projects into operation sometimes water year 2025 or 2026. Therefore, converting from research to operation is very critical for us. This is our plan for water year 2025. We are planning to have 36 flights over those watersheds. Of course, the timing of flight does not match here, and we'll start our conversation right after Thanksgiving as we conduct weekly meeting in order to plan our flights. And we are pretty sure that we will have that many of those flights for this water year 2025, but beyond 2025, budget situation is not looking that good. So we'll see what happens when we'll know when we'll get there. And our plan moving forward, we like to continue our collaborations and for our additional funding and sustainable funding, we really like to do additional collaboration, and we need to educate our executive. And also we got to have additional collaboration with our Forest Service and National Park Services as we got to collect more ground truth data for verifications and others. And also we want to continuously improve and update our warfighter modeling, continue conduct working on our research and development and in-house ISO modeling, developing additional framework for warfighter, and we like to support our agencies to acquire additional flights through federal grant. Thank you so much for those visionary leaders who help this program make alive and bring till now. And then, of course, I like to thank all of our CCSS partners who help us to have this program keep going. And thank you so much for that support. And of course, our mega snow survey team who works tirelessly day and night to achieve some of those objectives of the climate resilient forecasting framework. That is all I have. Thank you.
I noticed that there was a name missing from up there. Ramesh. You've been key in so much of this. So, yeah. All right. Molly, how much time do we have for questions? Okay. All right. Great. Questions, comments? Come on now. Wes Moynier, you're thinking something. I know it. Here comes your microphone.
How do we help you? How do we ensure that those for 2026?
Got to reach out from different fronts, whereas I think we need to really work tirelessly and really we need to play a very key role, reaching out to those who have the authority and power to fund more and more on this program. So that's how I think we have to really work from different directions, especially within GWR, we have very limited authority and power. We really cannot do other than going and working even within hydrology and operation branch. What happens if there is additional funding that is out there, then I can go and ask other managers to have that used for this program. But especially from other agency side, I think going back and asking and having some support, I think that helps us to have that additional funding support to make that happen. So that's how I should say.
One other thing I'll mention is the NASA headquarters and also JPL back in 2010 and 2011. They were visionary in this as well, or they were easily duped by me to believe in what I was throwing at them. And so they really helped to enable this, as we mentioned with Aaron yesterday. All right. All right, Ramesh, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
All right, that's good. So Katie Duncan is next from Friant Water Authority, and Molly's bringing that up. Yes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Duncan. I'm the Senior Water Resources Engineer with Friant Water Authority. I'm really happy to be here with you all today and meet a lot of you in person that we see every week on our calls. So today I'm going to talk about ASO and water supply management in the Friant Division. Bear with me, I am going to read off my notes. So Friant Water Authority is a joint powers authority of Friant Division contractors of the Central Valley Project. The Friant Division spans, I'm going to get this and coordinate it all with all the buttons. The Friant Division spans the east side of the San Joaquin Valley and is served by surface water that's diverted from the upper San Joaquin River watershed at Millerton Lake, impounded behind Friant Dam. The Friant Division encompasses over 1 million acres of farmland and more than 1 million people, including 54 disadvantaged communities that rely on some form of groundwater. And when the Friant Division was created, it was really one of the first conjunctive use projects. So although I'm going to focus my talk on ASO, I don't think Sigma can go without being said that managing our water supply is crucial for also managing our groundwater supply within the Friant Division. And ASO technology has been utilized in the San Joaquin Basin since 2017. And it's like I said, it's an important part of our water supply management. And we really depend on our partners at the San Joaquin River Restoration Program, as well as the area office, the Reclamation Area Office, to leverage ASO data to complete forecasting and have effective water supply decision making. In addition to, like Ramesh said, in addition to the ARSS program flights that occur in the San Joaquin, Friant Water Authority annually funds a flight, which includes all the initiation costs. So if you're not aware, that first flight in each basin actually costs a little bit more for the initiation and all the modeling that occurs for the San Joaquin watershed. So I wanted to take this opportunity to just highlight water year 2023 as well as 2024 and our operations in the San Joaquin Basin. I think what's really kind of the main point home that we have is Millerton Lake is a 520,000 acre foot reservoir. So compared to the area of our watershed, it's a tiny reservoir. And we depend on ASO to be able to quantify and monitor essentially our secondary storage in our snowpack. So water year 2023, we all know it was a record year. Millerton Lake was encroached starting January 3rd. We had flood operations through July 29th. On the lower San Joaquin, there was substantial, significant flooding that affected disadvantaged communities and essentially all the communities in the lower San Joaquin River. And also really, really critical management through our restoration program. If you're not familiar with the San Joaquin River Restoration Program, it's a, I'm not gonna do it justice here. Sorry, Chad. Really critical program to restore salmon on the San Joaquin River, mandated by the San Joaquin Restoration Act. And so we really depended on ASO data to maximize water supply for the Friant Division through flood operations and then post-flood operations. What's really critical is not just the 2 or 3 flights that help quantify, peak snowpack in the basin, but what we're really focused on and what we continue to seek funding for is our late season flights. And I think you saw that with Ramesh's slides of where we're placing flights for the San Joaquin Basin, but really focused on making sure that we can characterize what happens to the snow between accumulation and melt. So In 2024, obviously not the wet year that we had in 23, but a normal year that required just as much data and understanding of what was happening to our snowpack. Again, we were in what we call uncontrolled season or flood operations from late April to mid-June. And so understanding where that snow melt was happening, when it was happening, and how it was going to hit Millerton because of just the small storage capacity was very critical. This year, coming out of flood operations, we actually had a agricultural water allocation reduction. So again, understanding when this water hits the reservoir and how long it's going to last is really critical to the beneficial use within the Friant division. And I didn't have a slide for this. I'm pretty sure this is my last slide. But I did want to hit on just our kind of looking forward. I know Ramesh said this as well. And we are really so grateful for the ARSS program and tracking carefully what the state budget is going to do to flights. We are also constantly pursuing additional grant funding that will help us expand flights. Like I said, really focusing on kind of the shoulder seasons of the flight. So either very early or late flights, but also in situ measurements that can help validate measurements in off-cycle flights in the basin. But really what we want to focus on, as much as we say, hey, more data, more modeling, is the collaboration that we have with our partners at the restoration program, at the area office, and for that kind of local agency forecasting that occurs in the San Joaquin. Our board is really invested and understands the value of this program, and we continue to find ways to leverage that support so we can continue to educate everyone in our basin, but also make effective decisions as water supply continues to change. And that's all I had. Great.
Questions? Comments?
Hey, Katie.
Hey, Chad.
Friant Water Authority has been an early proponent of ASO, not just encouraging its adoption in the San Joaquin, but also writing checks to fund a lot of the early flights. And so from the perspective of your water authority, your board of directors, how would you couch the benefit to your water supply? Because you put financial resources out there to get this done, or if there are other basins in California or in other states where the water users are considering, okay, should we put money forward to do this? Like, what's your message there?
Yeah, thanks. So not to get too deep into the weeds of the logistics, but this is a line item in our annual budget. It goes before our board every single year. And every single year, our board turns over. Every single year we have someone that says, well, it's a big chunk of money. Like, is this worth it? And I'm not going to take credit for it, but Ian Buck-McLeod, who's our water resources manager, I think has trained and really provided solid evidence to our board the value of return. And now we don't even have to say anything. Usually when a new board member says, hey, what's up with this chunk of money? One of the other board members that goes, yes, it's an absolute yes. It's a 50 to 100 time value on return of investment. I'm sure that's not the exact number when you do the BC, but yeah. So there is no question that this is a standing budget item. When we need staff resources to pursue grant funding for this type of work, it's an automatic yes. When we need resources to support Chad, it's an automatic yes. And I say all that because I think it goes back to what Dr. Anderson was saying at the beginning. It's not just about the percent allocation that our agricultural users are getting. I think the San Joaquin River and the Friant Division in particular is unique in that it sees the environmental benefit because it's so connected to the restoration program. It sees the economic benefit of knowing that knowledge for lower San Joaquin River uses and flood control. And then it knows that benefit and the value of that information. And I was talking to Chad earlier about, hey, I think there is a desire for our board to continue to be able to digest this information and be able to make even better informed decisions. So I think it goes to, this is a very long-winded answer, I'm sorry. I think it goes to the education, and we are telling a consistent story every month at our board meeting. We have ASO in our operations reports every month, and we're making sure that that's connected to how we're making our decisions. And we have just been very clear in how this data, the downstream benefits of that data.
And roughly, what is the amount of money that Friant Water Authority allocates each year in round numbers?
It gets more every year, which we all know cost rise, but it's about $325,000.
Okay, so that's about 20 cents an acre foot by my math on average. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here comes your microphone.
Groundwater recharge and how that's a big part of what's going on in the valley. What's the upside there, say on a wet year like 23, and could that broaden, telling that story wider broadens the support base? Is that true?
So I think I understand your question of how is this investment also being made in light of Sigma and the changes in groundwater management that's occurring in a year. So in 2023, when it's such a wet year, it's not as much about allocation, but it's as much about when we're in what we call uncontrolled season for multiple consecutive months. It's about how much water they can get in the ground and knowing when that's going to stop and when they stop putting water in the ground and then start using it just for your surface irrigation. And so in a wet year, there's a lot more flexibility, and they're just tallying their groundwater credits and hoping that those groundwater, right, like all the things that a wet year should do. I think more critically, it happens in normal years where there's not 100% allocation. And there's kind of this flux between you're in flood operations for a month and a half, but you don't have a full allocation. So again, that same strategy of knowing exactly when the water's hitting or when our snow storage is gone, to be able to get as much in the ground as possible or keep pumps off as long as possible, because surface water is, in a post-Sigma world, surface water is worth so much more money than it ever was before.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. That was great. All right. So, going to the Yuba, and from the Yuba Water Agency, Charles Johnck and Kaitlyn Chow. and you're going to do a tag team talk. All right, great.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Great to be back here at the ASO conference. Well, as you know, mountain weather can be challenging to predict. So on this day, on February 9th, this last winter here, we arrived on the snow course at Robinson Cow Camp, and the skies were relatively clear. However, by the end of the snow survey, it started snowing. So we were scrambling to get back to the helicopter. And if there's one way to find out how fast your snow surveyors can put back a tube, it's with the fear that they either get stuck in the middle of nowhere or have to spend the night with their co-surveyor in the sleeping bag. So they probably put together that snow tube in like, less than 20 seconds. So the following day, we got our ASO flight on February 10th, and we were able to provide data to calibrate that flight. So I'm going to give a recap of the ASO flights of last season, and I'm going to hand it off to Kaitlyn, who's going to talk about water year 24 operations and how ASO has improved and can improve the forecast that we rely on for water supply and flood control operations. So first, a little bit about Yuba Water Agency. We were formed in 1959 by an act of the California State Legislature, really due to catastrophic floods in Marysville at the bottom of the screen there and surrounding communities, and the need for a reliable water supply. We operate the Yuba River Development Project, which supports those missions of water supply and flood control, supported by hydroelectric power generation, supports recreation, New Bullards Bar Reservoir, fisheries enhancement in the lower Yuba River. Additionally, we also supply approximately 260,000 acre feet of water to 8 irrigation districts north and south of the Yuba River. All right, so for the flights last year in the Yuba Watershed, we were fortunate to receive 5 flights that had a nice span through the accumulation and melt. This is a graph showing the watershed SWE throughout the year. And despite the late measurements in February, really the March, April, and May flights really were timed nicely to meet the B120 forecast deadlines. And then we're fortunate to get also a late flight in May, supported by Chad and the USBR team. So thanks for that. This is what the distribution looked like for those 5 flights. Note that, through February through early April, we had a pretty similar snow line. And then in late April through May, you can see it declining. We peaked out on April 1st at 800,000 acre feet. It's amazing that we were able to get a flight exactly on April 1st. Like, nice work there. Yeah. This was our first year getting wharf hydro modeled in the Yuba. You can see the 5 stars indicate the inflow forecast points. The one that are most useful to us for operations are the inflow to New Bullards Bar Reservoir, as well as Yuba River at Smartsville at the bottom there. So future projects, we'll look into incorporating wharf hydro into our operations models. Additionally, we're working on a dashboard that can take the ice snowball model data and look at detailed SWE by sub-basin. So we rely on, right now, on DWR snow tracks, which is amazing. It's been super helpful, but it just provides distribution of SWE with the entire watershed. So we're really interested as well on, by sub-basin, such as in the north, middle, and south. And so we're working on a dashboard to further get higher resolution on by sub-basin. And lastly, my slide here we applied for the USBR Snow Science Grant application last year. We teamed up with Placer County Water Agency and El Dorado Irrigation District to get 5 flights between the Yuba and American River Watershed and Wharf Hydro in the Yuba. We're supported by all these agencies here. And the American, like the Yuba, has a large population that relies on, accurate forecasts for flood control, and there's a lot of players in generation and water supply. So hopefully, we haven't heard back yet, but we'll see what happens. I know everyone here is probably our competition, right? But yeah, good luck out there. All right, I'll pass it to Kaitlyn now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of Yuba water operations from actually this water year. In order to do that, though, I have to bring out the wider context of the Yuba River watershed. Charles really orientated you on our project site of New Bullards Bar Reservoir, which is upstream of our control structure of Inglebright Dam as well. A 1 million, pretty much just shy of 1 million acre foot reservoir upstream of our, pretty much the capacity of Inglebright's about 7,000 acre feet, mostly on the North Yuba watershed. And I say North Yuba because there is the middle and the South Fork of the Yuba River, which of course we don't ignore, but there's other entities involved in there that we, for the large part, just receive their downstream flow. So something I do want to highlight is on the middle fork of the Yuba River, you have Fordyce Reservoir, which is technically a smaller tributary stream on the middle fork of the Yuba River, and that's run by Pacific Gas and Electric. And then on the south fork of the Yuba River, predominantly, I just want you to focus on Spalding, which is the nexus point of how Pacific Gas and Electric, as well as Nevada Irrigation District, move water from the middle fork of the Yuba River to the south fork of the Yuba River, and then from the south fork of the Yuba ultimately into the Drum Spalding plan, which is eventually ends up within the Bear River watershed and into the American River watershed. If you want more information, I'm sure you can talk to Bobby, who used to work that system. But for the purpose of this talk, just understand Yuba Water Agency is predominantly a player within the North Fork of the Yuba River. And then other entities are within the watershed, but Yuba Water Agency is predominantly downstream of all of those other headwater entities. In order to talk about what we ultimately went through, I want to bring, Pacific Gas and Electric actually ended up doing an outage at Fordyce Reservoir, which isn't an issue, except this happened to be also when there was an emergency outage at Spalding Reservoir, which is the main nexus point for how water moves from the South Fork of the Yuba into the rest of PG&E's system. There was no way to get water out of Spalding, which is a rather large reservoir, which meant everything went down the South Fork of the Yuba River. Not necessarily an issue for us. We typically deal with some flood flows within the South Fork of the Yuba River, but not to this magnitude and scale that happened because of all of this run of the river activity that happened on the South Fork of the Yuba. What that actually ends up looking like is this graph. And I think it's telling that in order for me to find a similar B120 of an average inflow and also a similar North Yuba index, which is our specific index, I'll go into that. But in order for me to find a similar hydrologic condition for this average-ish year, I'm talking about that I had to go back all the way to water year 2010 in order to illustrate that the blue was this past year. You can see some spill, but we typically don't spill for 2 months straight in a somewhat average year. And you can see by the red line of this hydrograph that in water year 2010, we spilt for maybe 20 days. And now we're dealing with spilling for multiple days, almost 2 months straight. So we went from people complaining that, oh, the river level's too low during the drought, to the other one where river levels are too high, and then people are still complaining that the river levels are too high because this is also during a time in the spring season when a lot of people wanted to recreate in the river, and we're saying don't do it, it's pretty dangerous because of snow melt. So dealing with more water through the river system on the South Fork, and the way that we tried to combat this was predominantly I used DWR's products. So what was very helpful in trying to estimate how much water is going to potentially come out of the South Fork of the Yuba system. It's predominantly a snowmelt system. So the ASO, this is just the typical ASO report, but you'll notice I expanded this table, which has two different descriptors: above New Bullards Bar Reservoir, pretty much the North Fork of the Yuba, and then above PG&E and NID reservoirs. And you can see it's approximately split 50-50 between 363,000 acre feet and 312,000 acre feet. So this allowed us to at least have some metric about how much water we potentially expecting. And that's not bad considering I calculated the difference in Englebright's spill of that, and we're looking at an additional 243,000 acre feet that went down the South Fork of the Yuba River that we might not have otherwise seen. In addition, I heavily used all of the DWR snowmelt briefings as they were coming out just to try and give my planning operations team a better idea of when they could complete certain tasks in their outages that they can't do during high water events. So you guys did pretty well. You estimated early June, snow off season, and we officially stopped spilling at Englebright June 8th of 2024. So thanks for that. I always appreciate good timing forecasts. And then I'm going to switch gears because I wanted to bring out the larger context of this is just one way that we utilize DWR's tool sets as well as ASO data. In the past, we've already talked about the Yuba Accord. I won't bore you, but I do have to at least reiterate that the Yuba Accord is one of our governing operational agreements. It's how do we best operate the Yuba River Development Project for hydropower generation, fish, environmental flows, farmers, the list goes on. And so one way that we do that is by, in addition to our FERC minimum flows, we add additional water depending on the hydrology of the year in order to best maximize the natural hydrologic regime. What this ultimately ends up doing is we calculate the North Yuba Index, and the North Yuba Index is a not just a watershed specific index, but our tributary specific index that incorporates our Bullards Bar Reservoir storage plus the B120. That's why when DWR is coming out with the B120 and including ASO data, we're very much looking, what does that mean our North Yuba Index is going to turn into? Therefore, what is our schedule going to be? Schedule pretty much means normal to wet year is going to be a Schedule 1 all the way down to a Schedule 6, which is a very, very dry year. Most extreme is this conference year, which is almost like I don't know why they didn't call it the Schedule 7. We like confusing people maybe. But over here, you'll see what we're trying to avoid, and this is water year 2021, where pretty much February B120 came out, put us at a Schedule 2. Great, let's release about 700 CFS in a lower river for minimum flow compliances. Sounds good. As the B120s started coming out, by May, we ended up at a Schedule 5. And that's just how it ended up being. But pretty much from turning to a Schedule 2 all the way to a Schedule 5, that was an extra 40,000 acre feet that went down the river that wasn't being put to all of the beneficial uses that we could have been doing. So we're really supportive of DWR's efforts to improve the accuracy of the B120 for our forecasting planning. And this year, pretty decent, went from Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2, bounced around between the two, and then ended up at a Schedule 1, normal to wet year. Pretty easy. I'm really interested in seeing how ASO helps to inform dry year conditions, as Yuba's pretty new to ASO only in the past 2 years or so, which happened to be a very, very wet year and a normal year. We just need one more to get the three sections, right? All right. Some other efforts that Yuba's going into, Mike Anderson actually talked about this, so maybe I should just skip this, but pretty much Yuba's doing coordinated flow operations with the Department of Water Resources, predominantly with the Orville division. That's also getting rolled into our partnership with CW3E, who Garrett's over there, Gabe's over there, and NOAA in terms of our forecast informed reservoir operations. And this is a way for us to try and be proactive in managing our resources instead of just reactive to what ends up hitting the ground. We're trying to best plan and forecast with all of the climatic extremes and all of just incorporating as much data as we can to better inform our operations, and then ultimately codifying this with Army Corps of Engineers with the water control manual update. Happy to talk your ear off, but this pretty much shows the Army Corps of Engineers currently accepts that we have a calendar year approach, regardless of if it's a wet year or dry year, regardless of spring snowmelt, if it's going to run really quickly early on versus snow melt really slowly. This is a small, confusing, and slightly blurry diagram, but pretty much no matter the year, that trapezoid stays the same according to the Army Corps. Not necessarily what we're looking for this time, where we're trying to change that trapezoid into a conceptual forecast-informed reservoir operation FIRO space. And this pretty much is going to dictate what level on the reservoir we should be, depending on the hydrology that's getting experienced. We're working with all of the best forecast partners possible in order to really narrow this down and make sure we're using the best available science to inform our operational decisions. But pretty much the main aspects of this FIRO program is we're trying to reduce flood risk reduction, and we are dealing with a lot of operational constraints, considering we're doing this for both the Feather River and the Yuba, which have the same downstream control point. And of course, Orville has their own constraints and operations. Yuba has their own constraints and operations. But how can we best manage our two systems together to ultimately reduce the flood risk reduction of the downstream communities? It's a rain and snow driven hydrology. So we are trying to, the worst floods in this area happen to happen with rain on snow events. So we're seeing building on a secondary spillway at our facility to be able to evacuate water faster when we know this type of event might happen. Trying to get a better understanding of our ungauged smaller tributaries, which contribute quite a bit to our downstream flow. Trying to do everything related to rain, snow, and hydrology just to get a better grasp of our watershed that's rather small, but pretty mighty. I already mentioned multiple reservoirs, and then a simultaneous, as we're going through this science planning phase, we're also working with Army Corps and getting the water control manual updated. I'm happy to talk more about that, but pretty much I'm not working alone. I have a lot of other people at Yuba that's helping me. I have a lot of these partners too that's also helping this entire effort that's kind of happening throughout the state as well. But I don't have a summary slide, but pretty much I've talked your ear off. I can continue to talk your ear off. But what Yuba's initiative is pretty much trying to be proactive in using forecasts to best manage our project and manage our operations in a way that makes sound sense according to science and the rest of our communities. And ASO, CW3E, National Weather Service, all of them are big players in helping us determine what is the right operation to do and why. DWR, you're a fantastic partner. I love your products. I love that you give briefings. The weekly meetings that you do take a lot of time. The pre-B120 meetings do take a lot of time, but we really appreciate just being able to be part of the conversation. That way we can best set ourselves up for what you guys are seeing. Happy to take questions with my question slide.
That was really interesting. Thanks. I'm going to put Charles on the spot a little bit, or maybe both of you. Last year, maybe it was at the cooperators meeting, folks were going through saying what they would have done different potentially in the wake of such a big year. And somebody asked you, what would you do differently? And you just mic dropped. You're like, nothing. We nailed it. Which was pretty cool. I'm just curious this year, it's just a little tangent to your presentation today, perhaps, but with the information you had on hand from ASO, when you look back at your decision-making during the year on a pretty normal year, would you have done it different, or did you have the tools to kind of nail it again in water year 24?
Thanks, Mark, for that question. I remember that last year as well. Yeah, so would we have done anything different? Kayla, I might pass this to you, back to you. I'm going to give a better answer. Yeah, I don't think we would have, but do you have any comments on that, Kayla?
What I would have liked better for the small storms that we got is a better understanding of the rain and the snow delineation between the two, considering we go with the most conservative approach in terms of inflow forecasting. So even though we're pretty much using the deterministic, sometimes we bump it all the way up to the 75% and 90%, just to make sure that even if it ends up being a more extreme event than anything else, and that's because one, we're conservative, but two, we also work when we're in the flood space, we work on the worst case scenario. And that's just how we're used to. But I would eventually like to get to a place where I can use the deterministic and be comfortable with that. Right now, again, we're working on forecasts, but we still have to think worst case scenario. But I would like it to us to be able to taper that expectation of what a forecast can give us and have a better expectation of what those could be. The 3-day forecast is working really well for us. We do see some signals up to, I want to say 7 days, but we almost don't want to make a move until that 3-day forecast is in. If we can maybe get to the 5-day, we can have a bit easier times like, okay, let's slowly evacuate that water just for the purpose of sculpting a spill in order to better mimic the natural regime for fisheries compliance purposes. I guess this is a long-winded answer to say, yeah, I could always use better forecasts, better data. Am I going to be happier because it? No, I'm probably going to want more, but any little bit that you can improve and give us, then it's going to be helpful for us to just make the best operational decision that we can. But also understand I'm pretty greedy and will probably always want more. So be careful what you give me. Great. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. Maybe I missed this, but you mentioned that there's a lot of extra flow down the South Fork because that water was not being diverted. Was that just due to the extra flow because of the big water year? Or was that a technical problem with the infrastructure?
We have no, after Englebright's really small. It's only about a 7,000 acre foot capacity, just given it's not a reservoir. It's more of, it's a debris construction dam that we happen to use as a forebay for our two high powerhouses down below. And then down below Englebright, there's no way of saving that water, especially given the magnitude that we saw there. So we don't typically see that water in the year. Again, the normal spill at Englebright, something more on the magnitude of, I think it's 37,000 acre feet. And so when you're giving us 4 to 5 times that magnitude in a longer duration of time, we're trying to manage that as much as possible, but understanding there's nowhere to put it on the Yuba after it's downstream of Bullards. Our irrigators can take it, they took all the water that they want, but they can only really take so much at a certain given time, given their constraints, and they don't want to, they could flood, they do flood irrigate, but they don't over flood irrigate. There's just no other place to put it. And again, we're not used to receiving that water. That water typically gets exported out of basin. So we tried to be flexible and like, okay, what can we do with it? But we're pretty infrastructure limited. We know our water needs were not during the spring season. And it just pretty much, it helped the Delta. That's not for naught. But there's nowhere else to put it if it's downstream of Bullards for us.
Thanks.
Right, yeah. I mean, yeah, it initiated as a technical infrastructure issue up at PG&E. There's several. There's a canal failure, the South Yuba Canal failure. There was a Spalding 2, 1 and 2, yeah, both their power plants were offline. So their normal operations are to divert it from the Yuba into the American basin. And so they weren't able to do that. as well. And then South Yuba, Nevada Irrigation District typically takes that flow. So that wasn't, so everything was coming down the South Yuba. And so we had to figure out how to manage that water. And so there was a lot of uncertainty though, like of when the timing and magnitude of those flows. So I think knowing the snowpack in the South Yuba watershed certainly helped, with the forecasters, potential, well, I think it could help with if there's more integration of ASO into future CRNFC forecasts, and coupled with operational, constraints, say of our upstream water agencies, then we would have better information and may have managed, going back to Mark's question, we may have managed our fill differently.
Thank you. All right. Next up is Matt Siemens, who's a utility analyst, hydrologist for Turlock Irrigation District.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Can everybody hear me? We're good? Okay. All right. So as Tom introduced me, my name is Matt Siemens. I'm the newest addition to Turlock Irrigation District's hydrology team. And upon starting out, one of my primary tasks was to kind of obtain the data provided from ASO, kind of dig into it, see what I can find out, what I can come up with. And so I did just that. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the value that I feel ASO provides. Just doing analysis with the data gives us more intelligence, which increases our forecasting accuracy and thus leads to having more efficient operations. That helps us achieve our goals of conserving more water, generating more energy, more monetary savings, and in turn more ROI, or value in our investment, which helps us achieve our ultimate goal of being responsible water resource managers. So to start out with a little history, Tuolumne is kind of special, a little unique, because you may or may not know, in the JPL days, we were privileged to kind of be the pilot basin. And although some of those older data sets are confined to the Hetchy subbasin, it's still pretty cool to kind of get a full decade worth of data that you can kind of go back and see, how has it changed? How has the snow hydrology been in actually 11 years? And in total, we have 71 flights to date. And prior to ASO, I just kind of pointed out some of the sensors, Paradise Meadows, Tuolumne Meadows, Dana Meadows, and just doing a real crude estimation, multiplying those sensor values by the area of the basin. And you kind of get a little idea, and then you have ASO in the black there. And even though, one sensor kind of comes close, and even when you take an average of those, you still have quite a large discrepancy. So I think it kind of hits home on how valuable ASO really has become. And again, on the right here, the top picture is the network of our course survey locations and snow sensor locations. As you can see, a lot of those are clustered around that center subbasin, just the Eleanor subbasin. And there's a lot of open space in between, which leads for a lot of subjectivity. And below, you see just a point cluster of the ASO data set, which you have to zoom in pretty far before you can start to see, each of those points as individuals. So one of the first things I did is as beautiful as the snow water equivalent maps and snow depth maps are, I'm a spatial guy. I like to see what's the distribution going to be. And one of the things that we were curious about, well, what are these densities that are driving the amount of water in the snow? So I just performed, a little simple raster math, divided these two images, and generated a density map, as you see here. Kind of gives an idea of what the guys at M3 Works are putting out as far as density values. I then combined that, each individual cell of that density map with the elevation that corresponded to its location. And you kind of see the graph here, the scatter plot. And you can kind of see, clustering in the lower elevations, higher densities, and it kind of comes down. And TID, we like to have a little bit of fun. So to me, it looked like it was a little bit of a whale. So we call it, the whale curve. And since then, I've kind of updated that and with some scripting and kind of made it a little more scalable so I could keep up with the workload. On the left, you have a histogram that I created just to kind of get a feel for what's going on in the data set. It's divided by 200 bins. There's about, I think, 6% per bin. So you can't really tell, but in the table that's provided, you can see, how many points are actually within that 2% interval that the average density fell in within 31 to 33%. So just, again, kind of gives you an idea, like what's really going on. And on the right, just kind of an updated scatter plot, same method, just combining the density values with the elevations. And call me crazy, but, I kind of thought we might see an old friend. And again, I've done this for each of the sub basins to just kind of, I forget who it was yesterday, they mentioned every basin has its challenges, its differences, and you can see that too within the sub basins of the one basin that we look at. So we also do some time series comparisons. So obviously between each flight, we get a checkpoint. I take the difference between those, just subtracting the image values from one another, and then go ahead and throw some paint on it and see, where those changes occurred. What's the net difference between them? And you have SWE on the left, and depth in the middle, and density on the far right. Then I have some tables that kind of just graph those values and the raw values of those maps. The top left is just the static values from the previous flight. The middle top, the more recent flight I'm comparing to. And then just below that, we have percent difference and then raw value differences. I had to split up the middle graph because the depth likes to shoot up sometimes when there's avalanches in the basin and whatnot, and you have extreme maximums. So of course, I take a look at, comparing these to the data sets that we had previously, before ASO, and that would be the course surveys and our sensor network. And on the left here, we have Dana Meadows, just an individual course location compared to its corresponding ASO value. And that little bar going on the bottom of the graph is kind of like a days between. So in some of these, you might see a little bit of a difference, but you have to take into account, some of these are 3, 4, 5 a week, 7 days in between, and a lot can happen in that time period. The little bubbles are corresponding to just percent differences relative to that flat line that goes across just 100%. So in green, we have a course survey value. The orange is a 50-meter depth value, and the yellow is a 3-meter depth value. On the right, again, just a running daily comparison with the ASO flights and the snow sensor values. And I want to point out here, when you take the 10-year average for Dana Meadows course surveys versus the depths, you kind of see, according to my calculations, we have 80%, 88%. But then you take the 5-year average, it goes up. And then again, you look at that specific, this is a specific example from March 16th, 23. You're like right there on the money. So I think it's important to show that, through all the work that ASO has been doing, they're definite and observable improvement, and, it shows. Another point, getting to that, the high variability there. This is a digital elevation map from USGS. I tried to just take a section of the basin, which is relatively flat. There aren't really any flat locations up there, but this is a transect running through Tuolumne Meadows. And I took cross-sectional profiles of the data sets. So you have density on the top, SWE on the middle, and depth at the bottom, all 50-meter resolutions. What I want to point out is this one here. This is the 3-meter depth raster that I took a profile of. And you see how vastly different it is when you really increase that resolution. And it just kind of speaks to how volatile and rigid the topography really is as you move through the basin. And it's one important thing I thought was, got one more. So I overlaid the 50-meter depth profile on that 3-meter, and you can see that big spike kind of towards the right there doesn't even show up because it's just averaged out. So it's always really, on one end you have like a magnifying glass, and on the left you kind of have like a microscope. So on the concept or the topic of the 3-meter, There's not a whole lot I've been able to do with it yet because just the size and the sheer scope. When I look at each individual cell, there's somewhat of 330 million cells or something in that data set. And GIS doesn't like that. It likes to crash anytime I try to compute anything on it. So I'm experimenting with some ways to kind of chop it up, and we'll see what happens. But in symbolizing, I can kind of at least get a picture of it and kind of see what it looks like in comparison. But then I had the idea, like, well, what if I could kind of manipulate the other data sets and kind of increase the resolution on those? So I, resampled the SWE data and performed that same calculation I did previously, created a 3-meter density map, did the same thing for 3-meter SWE. Those comparisons are seen here. The top row would be 50-meter, and the bottom row is a 3-meter comparisons. And you can kind of see, obviously there's, but as you really get into that finer granularity, you start to see just, a more representable distribution. So this was a fun one. Last year when we were getting absolutely dumped on with snow, I kind of had the idea like, well, I have all this data accessible to me, even though, we work for the Tuolumne water basin. But how can I see, where we fall within the state's hydrology? And it was a big issue. There's a lot of flooding going on. And as Mike Anderson pointed out, you notice in that top section, the northern half of the state, there's not near as much water or snow as there is in the lower half. And so I kind of characterized where we sat amongst the state. We were 11% of that total SWE distribution given that at that time period. And summed all these SWE values coming down each individual main river. So we kind of had an idea, okay, well, half of the state's water is coming down the San Joaquin, and a quarter, or just under a quarter, about a fifth, is coming down the Sacramento, and the other, 31% coming down the Sacramento, and the gray 20% would be the other. So it gave us an idea, obviously there was a lot of conflict. People were trying to work together. Hey, can you hold off your releases? We're trying not to flood these people out. And so I felt like that was kind of neat to look at. So the last thing I have to talk about is something that, again, last year when we were getting slammed with water, it was about mid-May and temperatures were increasing, and we were trying to figure out, how much snow was up there. We didn't have a flight scheduled until June 1st. So I kind of just was trying to experiment with some different ideas. And I took the 2 most recent flights between our data sets and Merced's data sets, took those differences. And I don't know if it's really relevant, but I thought it was kind of interesting how if you look at the losses in the bottom here, the net differences between, you kind of have on the Tuolumne's losses, you have kind of like a 2 mirrored image. If you cut it, if you were to flip it on both axes, it's kind of the same shape. And then the same thing with Merced, if you just flip it across that y-axis, it's just like a almost symmetrical. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So I started out looking at, my idea was, what if I could kind of extrapolate what our status was based on Merced's data in accordance with square footage per elevation band. And so I took the elevation profiles from USGS and took a ratio of Tuolumne versus Merced in the table on the right. That gave me my projected volume, but it didn't really tell me what the timing of that was. So what I did then, I took the full natural flow values between that data, the dates of the Merced data set, and then we were, I think, from the last flight we had was April 27th. So I wanted to know what was the change between April 27th and May 15th. So I just kind of honed in on that section. Took the, well, let me go back for a second. Took the daily percent value from the accumulated full natural flow to get my percent of, or my timing, if you will. That ended up looking like something like this. So you have your total CFS between March 26th and May 15th, 806,000 CFS, which actually came out pretty close to what our full natural flows were, 102%. And then when I went ahead and kind of zoomed in on the date range I wanted, ended up being 45% of the total flow within, I think it's 36% of the time. So definitely not a one-to-one relationship there. The yellow line would be that total, and then when I scaled it back to that 45%, it would be the green. So I then kind of took, was thinking about, well, that gives me, the amount of water, but again, how do I tell where that snow was distributed amongst the mountain? So I kind of just, the only shapes I had to go off of were Merced's losses and Tuolumne's, I'm sorry, yeah, and Tuolumne's latest flight. So the yellow line there is kind of just shaped, and obviously it's more of it's just a scaled version of what you see on 427, that big blue line up there. But nonetheless, there's something to work from. I then did the same thing for Merced's latest flight on May 15th, and that gives you that red line there, the losses. Took an average of that just for fun to see what it would look like. And then finally, when we had our June 1st flight, went back and compared the curves that I created, and thought it was kind of interesting that it almost matched as far as the shape goes, the loss curve that I kind of generated from the May 15th flight of Merced. And when you subtract those losses, though, from the 427 at the top, the average kind of matched more closely. So that was kind of interesting. Nonetheless, I mean, that's assuming linear run or linear melt, which we don't really know what the timing when that occurred. But nonetheless, it was just something I thought was interesting to kind of look into. Yeah. And just lastly, I just want to thank ASO, and I know the guys from Empathy Works, they put in a lot of hours too, and I've had a lot of fun looking at this data. It's been really interesting to me to kind of start my career and be on the forefront of this. I feel like it's a growing industry, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to be discovered. So, thank you.
Nice. Let's keep doing more of that. All right. Questions? Comments? Dan, here comes the mic.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So you mentioned the 3-meter data gave you a lot more resolution, but if you could process that and do everything you wanted to with it, do you think it would actually help you from an operational standpoint to be able to do that? Does it change the final answer?
Well, I think the volume ultimately would end up being the same, but I think what it does show is a more precise, like snow line, for example. If you have 1 pixel or some areas of snow, obviously that picked up within a 50-meter cell or 164 square feet, as opposed to knowing exactly where that snow line is, and it's just more precise. So I think that it could have some benefits. Like I said, I haven't gotten to really get into it just because of the limitations of computing, but yeah.
Yeah, and right now the reason that we don't model density finer than 50 meters is just that the meteorological data don't support it. So we would be kind of wandering in the noise there. But if there's motivation to get there, then we can address that and try to figure out a way to get there, get closer to that. But I think that would require an enormous investment in infrastructure from state and feds beyond what Mike is asking for right now. Others?
Yeah.
Ramesh?
Just curious about your resampling technique you used from while you resampled from 50 meter to 3 meter. Which technique did you use?
So in GIS, there's just a resample process. It just basically will break up a cell, and it's all of the, I forget what it is. It's like a 16 by 16. So that many more cells within that 50-meter cell, they're all going to have the same value. But the problem is if I try to do some raster math with the two different resolutions, it's going to take the lower. So it would average out all of the 3-meter data within that 50-meter cell to a new value, and then it would spit me out a 50-meter.
Gotcha.
So I had to resample that first and then do that calculation to get unique values based on the 3-meter depths.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. All right. We are going to kick off now the rest of the afternoon. And we're going to start with Matt Meadows, who is a longtime friend of the program, a FOA, friend of ASO, and but not a foe at all. And I just want to say that Matt so often asks the incredibly relevant questions, and likewise does everything he can to bring data to us, ancillary data measurements, even though sometimes they're made underneath the snow play area sign. But that's okay, Matt. We still appreciate it. So, you ready to take it away? All right.
All right. So ASO has been holding this workshop for a while. For some reason, they keep inviting someone from Kings River Water Association back. So go onto their website and look at some of the old presentations. Today, I'm going to give a new one, I guess. Or am I? There's new people in the room. Kings River Water Association represents 28 member units that has about 1 million acres of the San Joaquin Valley as our service area. We've got irrigation districts, public irrigation districts, and private municipal water delivery in our area. That's kind of this colorful area on the left side. All of that goes into Pine Flat, and we work with the Army Corps of Engineers to manage the water at Pine Flat. Before lunch, you heard a talk from the San Joaquin. That's that blue line up above there. We're not going to worry about that for the most part on this talk, but it's just north of us. We call it our sister watershed, very similar, but so different at the same time. And then just talking about the geographic area here, our river is our distribution system, and we got over 70 miles of river channel, and crossing all types of GSA boundaries, and as well as county boundaries. So we work in 3 different counties. So the outline, and I guess maybe this isn't a different talk, it's the same talk. 3 challenges were presented last year. I'm going to go in reverse order as we go through what the challenges and successes that we had last year, and then just kind of add some new stuff. But we're going in reverse order of the what's coming next. So what was coming next after 2023? We had a huge year. We were talking about flip-flopping from potentially dry to potentially wet. Here's a record from 1895 or water year 1896 through present. The vertical dashed line is when Pine Flat, our flood control reservoir, terminal reservoir, was constructed. And then the horizontal line, dashed line that's flat is average. So what is average? It's pretty interesting here because this 10-year moving average of runoff for the Kings River had a couple of decadal cycles before Pine Flat. All of the math that went into making Pine Flat came from that. Then look at after Pine Flat was built. I squint and I still see those decadal cycles, but man, the water's a lot more frothy. So coming into, well, what is an average year anyway? These tall bars represent the snow water equivalent from April of 2024, where we had more runoff on the Kings River than that record period. The shorter bars that are kind of green to some people on the right-hand side are the historic average for all the snow courses. And this is just straight off of DWR's website. Just pull all the data and you can make the same graph. And then the bar chart on the left for each of these stations is this year. And we're across the board, all the way down to the lower elevations, we're pretty close to that historical average for April 1 snow survey. And they're in order by elevation band, by the way. That's what that little kind of line is as you climb up the mountain. Nice and pretty. So how did we fare? We ended up getting 4 ASO flights. We got one nice and early, calibrated the iSnowball model, which was great. I loved seeing all of the different iSnowball products, whether they're DWR or the M3 works. But we had 4 flights spaced throughout the season. We got the peak, we got a little bit of the recession. And this top graph is all of these different, or not all, but some of the different forecasts for the area showing, wow, we pretty much on the forecast, almost all the forecasts nailed that it was going to be an average runoff year early. By what, March, mid-March? What did that look like compared to last year? This is reservoir storage in Pine Flat. The line that's complete all the way from that side to this side was 2023. You can see we started much lower in storage and filled it up really fast. Get all the way through to the end and then start back over on this other line that's much higher. And we had a ton of carryover storage. We had a lot of runoff. We had to move a lot of water in 2023. And then we got kind of a lot of storms that came into our system that were cold, fell as snow down to low elevation. They kind of melted off a little bit from time to time, but they just trickled in and gave us an average year. And you can see that in Pine Flat storage. It just kind of slowly marches up to full. We did have to go into some flood control. We had a total of 20 days in flood control criteria, but ultimately we filled the reservoir pretty high. And when we were going into flood control or within flood control, we did a lot of forecasting internally because I have to show my water users that, hey, we have a need to move water. So this is one of those graphs. You know, if we shut off the flood release on any particular day, what are the odds that we're going to go across the red line? Because you can't go across the red line because that's full. So in this particular scenario, all of them went across. So again, what did we have? The success. This was a slide from last time. I just added this over here. We moved a bunch of water early in 2023. ASO products, all the modeling products showed that we just had a ton of snow. We had to move it. We ended up having a really dry spring, so we were able to pull back at the end. But if we even had average spring conditions, we would have just had to keep on the gas and move a ton of water. Every year's different, 83 was the second wettest by a little bit compared to 2023, but how it came was different. So, but you can tap yourself on the shoulder a little bit when you say that we diverted more water than we did in 1983. But if you look at the detail day to day, it came down the hill different. ASO helped with it. The forecasting all helped with it. Most of these huge years are then followed by subsequent years that then you have to flood release because you had too much carryover storage. So in 1970, they had 3 short flood releases. All that water was diverted. 1984, and then another 500,000 acre feet plus was sent out of the area. And in 2024, we had 0. We diverted during that 20-day period 288,520 acre feet, and about 120,000 to 130,000 was on top of what would be typical. And this graph is kind of a conceptual model of what would be typical. The stair step thing on the bottom is some sort of estimation of what normal irrigation would be during a season. The one in the middle is if my friends at the Army Corps tell me I need to get rid of some water and I go into flood release, what my water users will likely take. So the difference between here and there is what you can just use at the light switch in a flood situation. The top line is that center line plus me sending channel capacity out of the area. So that would be our maximum amount of water that we could put out without risk to our area. So how do these lines change? That's where all these well, first of all, where do you have the biggest gap between typical irrigation demand and a flood irrigation demand? And that's early. So you need to know early that you can move that water to have the biggest impact and put the biggest water supply in the ground. And then after that, well, what's changing these lines? You've got increased irrigation demand just as they have crop patterns go in, and you have 1 million acres going to almonds or whatever it might be. The blue line, the one in the middle, it's increasing especially early as people are putting in groundwater recharge basins. And then subsidence and other things can impact that top line and drop your channel capacity on you. So I'm not saying all that's happening. Some of them are probably happening. I mean, 1 million acres is a lot for someone to just drive around and figure it all out. But there's changes to how these lines are going from season to season, and a little bit of change in how individual water users are drawing on their supply. But one thing that's really important is right at the very end of your season, whether it's a regular filling up the reservoir scenario or a flood scenario, but capturing as much as you can and balancing your risk. So what is that point? And that's the point of equal flow. That's where you're going to stop storing and you're going to start drawing down your reservoir. So you have a stable reservoir, and then you're basically at peak. And so here we have natural flow. That's this line here. It's blue. And then there's a red line that's lower. That's the actual demand. You can see a couple bumps in demand. That's when we were flood releasing. It goes up really high, it goes up really high. But natural flow on our system, it drops like a rock. If you go every year back, you'll see it just dropping. And the point I'm interested in, now that we're switching to inflow, I'm going to pretend like I don't have upstream water use or water storage capacity with some of our partners, and pretend that it's all just coming into Pine Flat. Here's inflow where it crosses your demand. That's your peak. That's your peak storage, your point of equal flow into the reservoir. And I'm bringing that up because we've heard a lot of folks that are like, they have a lot of models, they're doing a lot of great stuff, but I think I'm more Neanderthal than everybody else. So I try to come up with some bonehead ideas that anybody that gets ASO data for the first year, second year, third year, before all of these modeling teams can go into it and tell you what the real number is, and try to get to this really important point in reservoir management, which is the point of equal flow. So you're watching your ice snowball, and you're watching 10, 20, 30,000 acre feet a day melt out of ice snowball. And then you have River Forecast Center, other forecasters giving you your daily runoff estimates. And you're wondering, is there enough snowpack to give me that forecasted flow? So we have to arm wave a lot of this because my outflow is going to be dependent on 1 million acres of water users. So that's going to be my best guess at any time of the year. And then I have to have my remaining modeled snowpack. And then I stare at my CNRFC forecast and go, can they hit their deterministic? That's what I'm playing here. So I go onto the CDEC snow website, and I see what my remaining modeled snowpack is. I estimate what my pine flat outflow would be to hit that point of equal flow. And then I go, well, is 160 gonna get me my 7,000? And so going into the weekend, can I drink Mai Tais by the pool? I got to figure that out. This line suggests that with 99.38% certainty that I can. Did anyone see a problem with this one? What's this gap? So that's all the dry years. That's my demand during those dry years, rounded numbers. Here's my demand during the wet years. And how did we end up in 2024? Did we end up on the line? Show of hands, who thinks we ended up on the line? All right, 1, 2. How about above the line? 1, below the line. Look at that. So based on this, don't worry about the numbers there, but I estimated that if I had 170,000 acre feet of snowpack, I would have my point of equal flow on June 6th. We ended up on the 10th. Pretty close. So now I have a new curve going into next year. 99.43%. The equation's a little bit more complicated. It's getting out of my comfort zone. Throw all of your statistics classes out of the window because, I'm not dealing with the fact that I have all types of time series problems. And I also am not worried about the fact that I have 2 reservoirs upstream and all that. But I think it's something to think about. So I'll just leave that there. Measuring snow and ground truthing. This is a picture from 2023. Where am I going to sample the snow here when snow cups are 3 feet deep? That's kind of one of the challenges that we had last year. I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about our Kings Basin. It's huge. The snow zone would be anything, say, above 6,500 feet. That's kind of this gray area and higher. Anything that's colorful or gray is above 6,500 feet. And then the other colors are wilderness areas and national park. So you can see most of our area is in wilderness or a national park. So now we have ASO flying. They always ask me when to fly, and I said during the snow survey window, because that's when we can get the most ground truthing in, especially when you have sensors that are either working or not working. And then they're going to call you, and then they're going to say, can you sample some snow? So you're going to use all the resources you can to find out if you have snow somewhere. So there's one of our webcams. And here is my weekend snow survey team. Because we started doing this supplemental sampling mid-month, you need some type of ground truthing. In 2023, it destroyed a ton of our sensors. We had like less than half of our sensors working through 2024. So you need a lot of supplemental sampling. We started off haphazard, and then we've tried to do some development over this season. Devin and I went back and forth about a few things. I'm going to share some of that with you on how you should consider your basin when you're figuring about supplemental sampling. What does that mean? So here's a bullet point list that you can look up later. I'm not going to read them all, of things you should consider when you're finding a place to sample that is not in a snow course. don't just go poke one hole. It took longer to drive up there than the one sample. So think of a method. If it's really hard to get your sample, do that one, because that's 3 points. If it's really easy, you know, get 5 or more. And then as you take a step back and you think about, well, how long am I going to be able to do this? What am I going to be able to do for my watershed? Our association has 6 folks that work for it, including the secretary. So how do you cover an area of that magnitude? It really comes down to other partners that are in the area that can do this type of work. And here's just kind of an idea of what it might cost to do this. And then I really wanted to coordinate. Like, I could just give this to somebody, like a guidebook, and they can go and do it and sample in the right spot. Because as Tom might tell you, I might say, I don't need a GPS because I know where I am. Well, I know where I am, but I didn't know where the watershed boundary was. And I was being lazy, so I just drove to a parking lot and then found out I was not in the watershed. I had to walk. So it's useful data, but it's more useful if you cross that line right there. And it's a really pleasant walk. But the problem here is, you saw the map of where our wilderness areas are and the national parks are. There's very few places here that you can drive to that meet a bunch of criteria that also aren't in a snow play area that are above anything useful late in the season. The highest one here is 7,700 feet, but that's in the parking lot that's outside of my watershed. And then, of course, you go to the north. If I only have one day, I have to decide. Am I driving? If nobody else is helping me out and it's just me and my kid on a Saturday, am I going north? Am I going south? Because it's going to take you all day. If it's Sunday, they tell you your wheel's up, but you happen to be skiing in the San Joaquin and you think you're going to hit that top star, you'd be wrong. It's a great site. It's at a weather station. It was burnt over. It's easily accessible, but it's also a snow play area, so they don't necessarily like that. But again, now you're limited still to 8,000 feet without having to, you're already taking a day even to do that. So to do beyond that is even more of an effort. So I'll leave you with that. Here's challenge number 1. Last year, it was a lot of snow. We'd had 152 days of flood release. We had the second wettest April through July runoff by about 13,000 acre feet. So it's probably within the noise. Water year runoff, we had more runoff than the other 2 years. And just look at the snow. This was the same sensor that I showed you that was laying on the ground. It was up in 2023, but after the snow all melted, it fell over. So one of the challenges that we had that year, and throughout the state, people have said everyone did so great in 2023. Anyone want to guess where this is? Was it? Yeah. So this is like the center of Tulare Lake in 2023. And that's after it already started going down. The King sent about 250,000 acre feet of water into Tulare Lake. And we did it early. And it was really looking at the forecast of future weather and what we had to deal with in Snowpack, give us and the Corps the confidence that we can stop sending water to here. This put 100,000 plus acres underwater, which is, I've told, is all used up now as of the 31st of last month. But it's, you know, the river on the way to this location had low impact. And I think a lot of the communities that are along the river, you know, feel like we did a great job, but we put a ton of water onto this land and impacted a huge portion of that county and their economics. And you're probably waiting for how are we dealing with the fact that we had a lot of snow, and the answer is to have less. And we had problem with a lot of snow because it was hard to sample. Here's your solution: is have easier to sample snow. I think I'll take questions.
All right, I have a question to start off. Can you go back to challenge number 3,
No.
which was challenge number 1? All right, wait. Go to your grammar plot.
This is not the grammar plot. This is El
Right.
Cruz de Reyes,
It's what?
the King's Cross.
Nice, nice. So at what? So this is at that crossover at the
Yeah.
King's Cross.
Mhm.
Okay.
So this is the point of equal flow for Pine Flat. So inflow matching outflow.
Okay. Okay. So, all right, we need to sit down and walk through the data because I would like to know why there was that excursion, as I think you would like to know, so that you don't go with a nonlinear, a totally
well, and
unsubstantiated nonlinear
So,
relationship.
Look at so you have a date range of when it happens. Every year's different. So my outflow is going to be dependent on my irrigation demand and where it's going to, there's not as much water in these dry years to move. So my outflow number is going to be different. So then my projected inflow number has to be different.
Right.
So there's just, it's really complicated.
Yeah.
It's I've tried to simplify it to a couple dots on a piece of paper, but
can't.
Yeah.
Can't.
Well, as the Corps knows, they ask, well, what's your irrigation demand going to be? And I say, well, it depends. And so you have to call around, you look at historic record, you get as much information as you can in all these situations to try to build out what you think your irrigation demand is going to be on any particular day.
Yeah.
But then every reservoir is different. We're not trying to optimize for power. We're just delivering water.
Right.
So if you're trying to optimize for power and deliver water, this becomes so much more complicated.
So can you work this though off of a grammar plot, and then identify where you are on the grammar plot for the King's Cross?
I believe so. And the what I started to do here is there's a lot of interest in how the snowpack builds, and then when we have zero snow.
Yeah.
But you've heard me how many times say, we're done. And you're like, but we still have 160,000 or 180,000 acre feet in the Watershed. And I'm like, yeah, but I can go to sleep now.
Yeah.
Because my outflow is extraordinary compared to my inflow.
I like it when you're able to sleep much earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And you do send the pictures with the Mai Tai by the swimming pool.
Well, and
that's our goal.
So for the other thing I was going to mention, and this year more than others, is if they say their wheels up and you need supplemental data, and I look and I see a wall of clouds and I say, there's no way they're going to be wheels up, I'm going skiing. Then I find out that it's sunny behind my wall of clouds. And this year was that year. And I think it was the cutoff lows that we had that kept everything over Fresno and the foothills as opposed to up on top. And so many times on a Monday, I was going out to do supplemental sampling because I didn't believe they were going to be wheels up on Friday, and I went skiing on the weekend.
Well, we want you to go skiing.
And my kids have actually helped with supplemental sampling. It just becomes a lot more difficult when you have to drive an extra 45 minutes out of the way on the way home from skiing to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, when they're hungry and grumpy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scott.
Great presentation, Matt. Thank you for taking the time. This probably is the most important question I think anyone's going to ask today is, what ski resort is that?
Oh, this one is actually nowhere in my watershed. That's Mount Rose, I think.
Sorry. So when you're sampling, on those flight days at a ski resort, what resort are you at?
What was that?
Well, what resort do you sample, when the
Oh, well,
boat
so
wheels up?
my local resort's in the San Joaquin but my paycheck comes from the King, so I don't sample there.
Ah, I got you. Thank you.
Sorry, Chad.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
And I'll introduce Stephen. So Stephen is likewise a longtime FOA, and also asks great questions and always seems to have just a little bit of a twist with respect to everybody else in terms of flight timing requirements, and so it keeps things interesting, and we keep learning based on that.
To alternate it with Turlock because very thankful of Matt who's doing some analysis on Merced and Tuolumne, but my boss always says look at Tuolumne and then apply a rule of thumb against theirs, right? So that we try to offset it from Turlock so that we get extra benefit. That's right. Great.
All right, have at it.
All right, thank you, Tom. So we've talked about drought years in a couple of years ago, and then the really wet years, and this year has been pretty average. For people who don't know Merced, we are blessed to be below Yosemite. If you still don't know that, find me later, we'll chat. And I would like to highlight that last year I was envious of Olivia for having a really nice curve on the lake storage. And this year, in part ASO, we hit 1 million. Yay. We don't get anything, and we still get yelled at by our superiors. But I can say with the personal achievement that I'm now a millionaire, I suppose. We had a really high carryover, like everyone else, from water year 23, and we kind of maintained that all the way through. We had really dry December and January, even though it is an average year. The average doesn't quite show up as you would like. And it shows up in February, March, and at the end of the presentation, you'll have a little laugh about that. But we have 5 flights from ASO, and the 5th one is funded by Chad. Thank you, Chad. And this time I put in the lake storage just to kind of give you guys insight to what water managers kind of think, behind the envelope. Hey, I have 280, my lake is at 660, cool, right? And then you keep on going. McClure is about 1,024,000. And so we started to be thinking back in April and May. However, we still have more things involved on the back end, right? We have our ability to output water, and we have irrigation demand, and we also have incoming rain. So that's the part where the later you go in the season, the less and less chances you have rain or storm, and you become more comfortable with how high can you go, 1 million. And overall, it's a pretty good year for us. We're happy. It wasn't anything as crazy as a drought or a flood. And shout out to the cold content people. Thank you. I know this is not the latest iteration. We look heavily into the creeping trend of the snow level, and specifically because in water year 23, we have that section that got snowed on and basically outside of our snow free. And again, thank you for DWR for expanding that. We've been trying to get extra funding for that, and it looks like it's in the works. So ASO is still the one, just like that old song. Quick update is North Fork Merced River is operational and alive, and we finished surveying, getting the rating table. We even went back there to get the point of zero flow. So when the base flow, runoff side flow from all the foothills are near zero, which is kind of like now, when it's been dry for more than a few weeks, This side basically is a proxy to tell us what all the other smaller streams and tributaries are doing to our lake, which in our opinion, nails down our inflow number. So this is one of the nicest things that we've done in the last year. And of course, you guys work with Sierra Hydro. They're awesome crew. And together with the Bryceburg gauge, which we built a few years ago, they provide us with, I would say, 95% of the inflow. And that's when we are starting to move what we consider inflow. We've been in talk with DWR and a few other people. The lake have a very odd way of calculating inflow before this. We use mass balance, which is not a big problem, except sometimes you come up with negatives and zeros. And it works great in a weekly, monthly basis. Your volume is pretty good. However, when you start going into daily, or if you try to go even more higher resolution, it just doesn't quite work out. McClure have New Exchequer Dam, and then we have McSwain Dam, and then we have Merced Falls. They get smaller and smaller, and depending on how you chop off that daily calculations, the water is still in transit in between the dams and whatnot. And some people might ask, you don't have flow meter at your dam? Not quite one that we like. So we have to be creative in how we quantify our inflow. Don't want to get too much into it, but on the upstream that we're using now for, I think, a year, almost a year and a half, we've been talking with DWR, trying to get them to, hey, we change it. This is why it's different now. Bryceburg plus North Fork plus side flow. And the side flow, we use the 3-4 months data that we have from North Fork to kind of come up with some sort of multiplier effect. And obviously, that's a work in progress. So we are confident that we're getting closer than ever to actual inflow, unless it's raining. And February, this is a Sentinel Dome High Sierra webcam. And we were coming off of a dry December and January, and we're like, we have maximum carryover, but we don't have rain. So let's start squeezing some water. Let's start keeping them back. And then one day later, we have a lot of snow. And we're like, where did that come from? So we look at the webcam, frame by frame. And now we know who to call in case you want more snow. It's Verizon. And I traced it down to our partner at National Park, and they were like, well, that doesn't happen usually. I'm like, okay. They forwarded us to, I believe it was Nature Conservancy, I think. I emailed them, sent them the picture. Hi, we like to use this webcam as a gut feel check about how our watershed is doing. Can you please not add snow there? And they said, oh, no problem. We will move the webcam. I'm like, no. That webcam has been there for years. We like it there. Can you put it over there, maybe 10 feet over? I don't know if I got through to them. So we'll find out next year. But this got my boss pretty sad because he likes looking at it. There's a tree there, and he's like, we are good when the snow hits that branch. So he has calibrated his water management skills to a tree right there. I did ask him, did you account for the tree growing a little taller? He said it was within margin of error. So yeah, so that's my presentation. Hopefully it helps, and keep it short.
Certainly there has to be a question about that. Matt. Oh, we lost. Molly, do you know the buttons? It's on. Dallas, which button should she push?
So I'll just yell. You round up to 1 million or down to the million? Or did you
Down.
get exactly right?
Down to 1 million.
Down. And
Yes.
then for your ungauged basins, we do something similar for our full natural flow. So let's say you have a multiplier for 12% based on one of your gauges. We found that it's not linear. So high flows you're off, low flows you're off, but good luck.
We tried weighing it against the distribution of elevation in that 3 watershed that North Fork captures, and also by surface area. But it was only like 3-4 months worth of data, and obviously different year type. And yeah, we just put something there as a placeholder. And a shout out to DWR for having the Call SIP grant. Usually we have to apply for different grants, and then we have to justify why we would like a stream gauge or a weather station. But I think after that study with the 8% of all California streams are gauged, and that made it to the right people. And now there's a grant specifically for stream gauge. So that was awesome. And hopefully we have something like that for other things. Yeah. Great. All right.
Oh, before you go, I'm looking for Liz. Where's Liz? There's Liz. Oh, hi, Liz. When do you think we're going to fly the Merced extension?
I don't know. This summer, fall?
Next couple of weeks?
Yeah.
It's in the chute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Oh, the applause go there. All right. Thanks, Stephen. All right. Next up is Scott Fennema, who is not quite as old a friend of ASO, but definitely a great friend of ASO. And Scott's with the U.S. District Court Watermaster's Office. And one of these days, I'm gonna get you to really explain what the hell that means. So
It's part of our secret. We don't want anyone to know.
oh, okay, fine. Then I don't want to be killed. All right.
Thank
Are
you,
you
John.
mic'd up?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So advance, retreat.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, I apologize to you all first. The guys who presented before me, Matt, Stephen, they actually know what they're talking about. So bear with me on this one. Before I get started, I'd like just to take a quick moment to thank the ASO team for putting this together. As a ASO data user, it's so useful to be able to come here, listen to what all you other ASO data users are actually doing. So if we can we give the ASO team a round of applause, please? Thank you. I also am going to ask for one more round of applause. Now this one's a little bit more personal. I want to give a round of applause for you are all in my basin, the Truckee Basin. Let's hear it up for the Truckee Basin. Now, whether you know this or not, the Truckee Basin is the most important basin in California, possibly in the US. Now, with that said, I want to give a talk about collecting ASO data in the Truckee and Carson basins over the last 3 years. The title of my talk is The Wet, the Dryish, and the Somewhere in Between. Now, over the last 3 years, we have collected ASO data throughout our basins. Now, as we collect this data, well, I don't collect this data, as ASO collects this data, we all collect this data. Exactly, it is a community. It's almost like a family. I really enjoy that. Once this data is collected, our goal is to use this data as much as possible. Really, the analogy that I always use, because I have a very simple way of looking at things, is it's spaghetti. Let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. So we do things such as trying to calculate runoff efficiency. We work with partners, such as the RFC, to take this data and actually insert it into the RFC model and generate an experimental forecast that we're calling the ASO Informed Forecast. Now, once we have this forecast, then we can start looking at things like the comparison of ASO to Snow 17 and take this forecast and actually run it through operation models. So today I'm going to talk about the different components of how we use this data, really following this track of ASO data, integrating it into the RFC forecast for that experimental forecast, doing a couple comparisons along the way for seasonal forecasts, as well as Snow 17 to ASO comparisons, and actually looking at how operational changes may occur by taking this ASO data and integrating into operations. So ASO integration into the RFC forecast. So within the RFC forecast, there's this typical flow chart of the way that the data flows. You know, they collect the data from what happened yesterday, they integrate it through, and then they run it through the SAC SMA Snow 17 model combination. Once we get this ASO data, we could actually take that, kind of insert it, squeak it on into that Snow 17 kind of framework for the model initialization, and then kick off the forecast. Now, when we actually take this ASO data and integrate it in place of, or in lieu of that Snow 17 data, we're really busting the resolution of taking ASO data, it's at like 2.5 times 10 to the negative 3 square kilometers resolution, to anywhere from 14 square kilometers to 988 square kilometers. While you're all here, I hope you take the quick little 10-minute drive over to Lake Tahoe that way. It's beautiful. It is the biggest RFC basin, which is 988 square kilometers. So essentially, if you take ASO data from, you know, the 3-meter grid size for the depth, 50 meters resolution for the SWE, and you put it into the Tahoe Basin, we're going from all this data to a single value. Once it's in there, then we can start comparing products like Snow 17. So how did Snow 17 do this year? So in order to compare ASO data to Snow 17, we have to first consider what is truth. So if we say that the ASO data is truth, the actual amount of snow on the ground, we can actually start calculating things like model fit parameters. So within the Carson Basin, which is on the top here, the blue lines are showing ASO snow volumes. Now, when we compare the basins, we're only comparing subbasins where ASO data is actually collected. RFC has some other subbasins where we're not collecting ASO data yet. We may in the future. And we could compare those volumes. So, and the Snow 17 volume is shown in these green lines. So in this bar chart, I asked, how well did they do? Well, in the Carson Basin, the height of these bars are pretty similar. If we go to the Tahoe Basin, we start to see a really large discrepancy. It's close to 100,000 acre feet difference between ASO data and Snow 17 within the Tahoe Basin this year. We move to the Truckee Basin, so everything downstream of Tahoe, they also were pretty close. Well, again, if we compare Snow 17 to what we're calling as truth ASO data, we can calculate model fit parameters such as NSE, National Efficiency, where we're trying to maximize the value to 1, where a model fit of 1 means it's a perfect fit. Anything over 0.5 gets you publication. Anything over 0.9 in a management world means you have a really good model fit. NSE for Carson Basin, which is this first column, fits really good. Tahoe, not so good. We had 100,000 acre feet of missing snow. In the Truckee Basin, it fit pretty well. We've got overall, or a couple more model fit parameters in here. But so far, what can we see? Well, we saw that Snow 17 performed pretty well this year for the Carson and Truckee Basins. Now, one of the next parameters that we can actually compare once we have this ASO-informed RFC forecast and RFC forecast is how well did the seasonal runoff volume do, or that April through July runoff volume. So on the Carson River at Fort Churchill, our actual A through J volume this year was 163,000 acre feet. On the bottom, I'm showing a box plot that compares the RFC to the ASO-informed RFC, and I have to stare really closely. The green, in this case, is the ASO-informed RFC forecast, and the blue is the RFC forecast. If you measure the distance between the actual and the median on each of these different flights, where we have one paired flight here, so each blue-green is a different ASO flight. If we compare those distances, we can start to say which forecast did, air quotes, better. So on the first forecast, we saw that the RFC median forecast was a whole lot closer. There's a shorter distance between the actual and the median. So we can compare it to the ASO-informed RFC forecast. So we can say, in this case, RFC did better. Well, on this table, we have a quick handy summary where we can look at each of the different flights. First flight, RFC did better. Next flight, the ASO-informed RFC did better, and kind of vice versa throughout the season. Overall, for the Carson River Basin, both forecasts performed pretty well. Now, conceptually, when we were looking at Snow 17, Snow 17 performed pretty well in the Carson Basin as well, meaning the volumes were pretty similar. So if the snow looks the same, the runoff looks the same, it's kind of a mix. Both of them did pretty well. If we move over to the Truckee, we had an actual fair natural flow, which if you all drove in from Reno, you drove right across, right next to the fair gauge, which sits on the state line between California and Nevada. The actual fair natural flow is 251,000 acre feet. And again, if we look at that model, that difference between the actual and the median, we saw ASO did better on the first flight, RFC did better on the other flights. Now, the last one would be Tahoe. Now, within Tahoe, our kind of water forecast is called what we call a gates closed rise forecast. On April 1st, if we shut the gates to Lake Tahoe, how high would Tahoe rise until it hit the peak? This year, our actual rise was 1.14 feet. So if the gates were closed on April 1, it would have rose 1.14 feet. Now, when we look at the gates closed rise forecast between RFC and the ASO informed RFC forecast, overall, RFC performed better than that ASO informed forecast. Now, this is interesting to me because when I was looking at the Snow 17 data, there was 100,000 acre feet of difference between ASO snow volume and Snow 17 snow volume. Quite a large difference. Now, once we get these forecasts, we then take them, both of these forecasts, and we run every single individual trace of the RFC forecast through our operations model, which we call an MRM, which is a riverware term. It's basically taking the ensemble members and running them through and then kind of skinning the data on the backside. If we took all 43 RFC traces from both the RFC and the ASO informed RFC forecast, we can then calculate a percent exceedance on a day-by-day basis for things such as reservoir storage. So on these next series of slides, I'm going to show you this percent exceedance compared to the actual. This beautiful gold color is the actual value that happened this year compared to the 50% exceedance, 95, 80% exceedance, 25% exceedance, etc. Now, one of the big takeaways that you're going to see on these plots is that there isn't that much difference between the ASO informed and the ASO informed RFC and the RFC forecast. If we look at Lahan storage, which is a reservoir on the bottom of the Carson, overall, it looks pretty similar. There's some really, really minute differences here, but you can't see too large of a difference, especially at the scale sitting where you are. I think you gotta zoom your face really close to actually see any differences. If we look at Lake Tahoe elevation, all of the forecasts were showing that Lake Tahoe was predicted to get much higher, both the ASO informed RFC as well as the RFC forecast. Now, Tahoe is a reservoir on top of a lake, so we did manage Lake Tahoe with spill releases this year to keep it a half an inch, actually, I'm sorry, 0.6 of an inch from completely full up to the legal limit. We were close, but we didn't want to get too close. The RFC forecast kept showing some storms coming that had put us at risk of going over our legal limit. But overall, the two forecasts are pretty much the same. ASO informed RFC forecast filled a little bit earlier. Now, if we look at the managed flow within the Truckee River at that state line between California and Nevada, between these two forecasts, there isn't too much of a difference either. One thing you might notice is this ASO informed forecast, which showed more snow in the basin, showed that flow was going to get a little bit higher. Now, these plots are great and they're fun to look at. It's taking that spaghetti and throwing it at the wall, but how did that actually improve model fit to real operations this year? So if we compared actual operations to forecasted operations for each of these ensemble runs, we take that ensemble mean and compare it to the actual, we can start calculating things like model fit parameters such as NSE, Nash cliff efficiency, percent bias. We also calculated R squared and root mean squared error as well. When you start looking at all these different parameters, model fit parameters, we can start to ask the questions like, did one forecast do better than the other? Because what else are we going to ask? So we can look at each of these parameters for all of the different flights where each row is a different flight, each location is a different column, and we can qualitatively say, well, more model fit parameters were good from the RFC forecast for Tahoe. On Ferret, we kind of had a mixed bag across each of the different flights, but at Lahontan this year, the RFC forecast did well, as with Lahontan as well. Well, now what? We've been doing this for 3 years. Have we learned anything? I'm not sure. I think I still have a lot to learn. But if we think about hydrology in terms of a spectrum, when on one end, you've got a really dry spectrum, and on the other end, you have a really wet year. We've only collected 3 years worth of ASO data. So if you think about places like Lake Tahoe and that Lake Tahoe Gates Closed Rise, our worst Lake Tahoe Gates Closed Rise in a 100-year record was 0.13 feet. That happened in 2021. Fortunately, it was a year before we started collecting ASO data. Our wettest year on record in Tahoe, we had 4 feet of rise, which is pretty substantial if you think about how large Lake Tahoe is. That's a lot of water. That happened in 1907. Well, across this range, where have we collected ASO data? Well, we got ASO data in 2022, which on Tahoe was a pretty dry year, about a 75% exceedance, looking at 100 years worth of data. This year, it was about a 59% exceedance. And then we also had it last year, which is about a 26% exceedance year. Now, at Ferret, we kind of have a similar range, you know, about a 65%, kind of a dryish year, 47% exceedance. And we have this theme where we've kind of collected data at another location in Fort Churchill Gauge, which flows into Lahontan Reservoir. We've collected data on the dryish side and the wettish and kind of somewhere in the middle. Now, what have we learned? So far, what we have found is when we are on the extremes, especially kind of in this outside the 75% exceedance, that year, the ASO informed forecast performed better than the standard RFC forecast. On the wet year in 2023, there was many times where the RFC modelers were looking at ASO data, looking at the snowpack conditions and said, snow 17 did not generate enough snow. We therefore must add snow. That ASO informed forecast did better than the RFC forecast as well. So kind of on these extremes, it did better. This year, we were close to the middle, and more or less, the RFC forecast kind of outperformed the RFC forecast. So that leads to a question. Are there breakpoints? Maybe? I don't know. Let's throw another idea at the wall. Are there breakpoints where that ASO informed RFC forecast is actually outperforming that RFC forecast? Now, with that in mind, I have a large data gap, especially on the Carson Basin of ASO flights, kind of between that 50% to, you know, that 10% exceedance year. So if possible, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to put in my order. I'm really hoping I can order 2 more years. I got 2 more years of funding on this project where we can get a couple of years to fill in that spectrum to really figure out whether there are breakpoints where that ASO informed RFC forecast is outperforming the actual RFC forecast. Now, with that, I want to thank you all for letting me kind of drone on about some of the things that I've been thinking about. I hope it's helpful for you, and show you a beautiful picture of the Carson Watershed. I'd like to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Matt Meadows. Dallas is pushing the buttons.
All right, now I'm here. I think I talked a little bit about differences between water years and how the water came. Do you think that the type of precipitation or the way you received the precipitation drove one of your forecasts to outperform the other? Or do you think it's the whole season volume, or both?
Honestly, that's a great question, Matt, and I'm scared when you ask questions because they are very thoughtful. I think both play a role in it. In terms both the season volume, but also how that precipitation comes. This year, we saw that we had kind of a higher frequency of storms, but a lower magnitude of the size of storms. Even the snowpack seemed to have a little bit of a different texture than a lot of those gangbuster storms that we have. And I think that actually played a role in that runoff efficiency that we actually saw this year. So it's a component of both. But
so I was going to mention that you have a lot of small storms, but a lot of surface water input in between the storms that, maybe you're not capturing with the bulk of the ASO on the flights, but with the model between the flights, you get all that surface water input, either whether it's rain or melting snow, that's driving your antecedent conditions one way or another.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal question, especially if you're thinking about the two drivers of runoff, whether it's saturation excess or infiltration excess. In this case, we had a lot of that surface water input kind of filling up that soil reservoir, which we saw higher efficiencies earlier in the season, but we actually saw the efficiencies die off pretty quickly as well, which I think is a point right to your question of how that precipitation comes throughout the year. Getting those little inputs or little bumps to the soil moisture early increases early efficiency, but you're not going to get to the point where you're going to have actual infiltration access driving mechanisms at that point. Great question.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks,
Hey.
Scott. Is the ASO informed version that you were showing here, is that with the ASO information put into the RFC model without calibration or recalibration of the RFC model?
Correct. So we're taking the calibrated RFC model, we're taking the ASO data, essentially coming up with an average suite over the RFC basins, and then giving it to RFC, and they're just plugging in over top of the Snow 17, just rewriting that initial state. So it's completely uncalibrated. And this is one of the conversations that we've been having internally is you're taking the RFC model, which is built within a certain number of bounds, and it's a calibrated model. It is physically lumped, and how valid is it for us to actually insert this in? From my modeling perspective and academic background, I'm violating a lot of my fundamental assumptions of what we should do. From a water management perspective, I'm trying to grasp at anything I possibly can. Great question, though.
Yeah, so I think this calls for more ASO data because calibrating off of three years is a little sketchy as well. But you're going to be adding 2 more years here, and I have a feeling that you're going to see the ASO informed forecasts improving as you squeeze in closer and closer to the median.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of moving variables in this. As we speak, RFC is going through a process of recalibrating the model for the east side. So how is that going to affect results? They also have a longer period of record that they're using for calibration, which includes 2023 and 2021, the wettest and the driest in terms of Tahoe at least. So it's an interesting combination. I guess we'll see. And California DWR, thank you so much for all the funding. We are so grateful for you. Definitely want to plug that. I'm grateful for the funding from Reclamation and DWR.
Dave.
Yeah, it's just another side comment. It's related to what you just talked about with calibration. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, and it's that whole like I know at the end of the day, you got to go with the forecasts you have, right? And those forecasts have various information streams coming into them, some of them being pure model based and some of them being a human in the loop making adjustments or adding interpretive value while it's going on. And it just speaks to that in addition to doing the assessment of the actual forecasts that we have, when we look at where the sources of value coming into the forecast chain come in, having some raw model forecast, like raw computer model output before a human's really tweaked it or done anything like that. And you mentioned it, right? That they will do that in real time would be a useful thing just to see how well the models are tracking, or is a human having to make an adjustment in addition to, say, ASO data coming in and making another adjustment and so on and so forth. So yeah, it would be interesting to see some of these comparisons if, I don't know, the state wants to bite off a model assessment project or something like that at some point. But I think it would be useful because this whole like, where do we get value from in the forecast is big, in addition to knowing just what works best.
Yeah, absolutely. What works best? And one challenge from the water management side that is, I think, hard to kind of grasp is we now have all these information streams coming at us. We have these new forecasts. Now we have tweaks to these new forecasts coming at us. how do we as water managers come up with ways to synthesize all that information into actually making decisions? So not only the validation of the forecast and kind of getting that gut check, but taking that to the next step of making decisions.
Great. Any more? I guess the last thing is just on the Tahoe and the fact that there's such a huge difference between the Snow 17 and ASO snowpacks, and yet you're doing well, right? That suggests calibration.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. So I guess I can tell you in a couple of years, maybe we'll know more.
Yeah, of course we will.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
So next up is Harrison Forrester and Reggie Walters. Is Reggie here?
In Italy.
In the Dolomites?
Yeah.
Oh, damn. All right. That's a better location for the ASO workshop. So long time with interacting and friends of ASO with Hetchy Water and Power. And you're all wired up?
Ready to go.
All right. And again, this is so I think we're a 12-year record, right? We started in 13, we go to 14 to 24. And so it's a pretty amazing data set, although it doesn't have everything going all the way back. But at any rate, it's always exciting to see what you guys come up with. All right.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here today. Standing in for Reggie Walters, who you all, I'm sure, have met over the years. One of my colleagues, and has done some really, really exciting and fun work with these products. So I'll try to represent all that to the best of my abilities today. A little overview, pretty much an update on how we are using ASO data, building on what Reggie presented to this group last year. Background, the Hetchy regional water system is really based primarily in Yosemite National Park. O'Shaughnessy Dam impounds Hetchy Reservoir in Hetchy Valley. We operate two other upcountry facilities, Cherry Lake Dam and Lake Eleanor Dam. The aqueduct conveys water downstream through two powerhouses across the Central Valley into the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's all municipal water supply for just under 3 million users. Some of the fun statistics about the storage are that in general, on a median year, we see a lot of inflow compared to the size of the reservoir itself. So on a year like water year 2024, we were dealing with a lot of excess water, and walk through how ASO really helped us get through our reservoir management priorities and execute all of those this year. So here's a little hierarchy of our management objectives that kind of scale up with runoff volume. Starting with water supply, we've got our minimum stream releases, deliveries to the city, as we call them. And we also must refill Hetchy to the best of our abilities. Above that, we're operating excess hydropower through the facilities along the conveyance path. That water spills back into the main stem of the Tuolumne River and goes downstream into Don Pedro Reservoir. And above those two objectives, we get into eco releases, or the Upper Tuolumne River Ecosystem Program, UTREP. Our UTREP flows this year were around 250,000 acre feet of water. And those are primarily sculpted flows out of the face valves of the dam. So that's kind of what they look like on the photo there. So to get right into the review of ASO performance in the Tuolumne, the The famous grammar plot held up quite well this year. We had 4 flights. If you squint your eyes, the first couple flights were a little bit off of the line, with the April 2nd and May 1st flights being quite close to the line. So continued encouraging results. One of the big qualifiers with this plot is it's roping in future precip. So this is a retrospective plot. We can, I'll come back to that plot and how we use it after going into how we're roping in ASO to one of our in-house models, the Precipitation Runoff Modeling System, USGS model, semi-distributed model. We are currently using an iteration that is based on hydrologic response units. So Reggie's developed some nice workflows to incorporate that, resample the raw ASO SWE data down to the HRU scale, and directly insert that into the model. So here's just an example of how that direct insertion technique looks. So if you can focus on the right pane here, so that's our regression estimate using the grammar plot, possible outcomes for a forecast date. Here we're looking at April 2nd forecast. So the range of potential outcomes based on that ASO flight and future precipitation. On the left, we're looking at our kind of open loop PRIMS distribution, the black line, and then that PRIMS ASO ingested distribution in the blue and blue shading. So here on the right plot, the Tuolumne watershed precipitation came in around the 65% exceedance level for the water year. Here, Reggie's got a hindcast member added into the mix, so actual observed weather lining up quite closely to our regression estimate. And then we've got, of course, the all-important observed inflows in red, and those also coming in quite close to both of those ASO-informed products. So really, really encouraged about that as far as seasonal volume. You can see we had some pretty significant residuals as far as runoff timing, particularly at the end of May and into June. Here's another one of our in-house forecast products, a statistical model, water supply forecast model. It came in a little above where observed flows were. We also saw our products that we rely on heavily from the CNRFC. Those were above where observed flows were as well for this year. This is at Hetchy. So here's just kind of a mashup table of how things stacked up for seasonal volumes. Again, kind of focusing on the 60% exceedance. Here we're looking at our WSFM, PRIMS, open loop, and ASO, RFC. Also adding in the DHSVM product from Eli Boardman, and the WRF Hydro ASO product as well. So we were really pleased to see that although we did see some variance around observed values, some really encouraging results from a few different ASO-informed products for seasonal volumes. Okay, so now kind of shifting gears from the seasonal volume metrics into more of a operational runoff timing focus. So we had our hierarchy of reservoir management objectives. Those, in theory, go really smoothly if you have enough water to work with. But in the case of Hetchy, executing all of them can really hinge on your ability to manage the runoff timing. So here we're focusing on the UTREP releases. And in those UTREP releases, we've got a variety of ecologically significant objectives. One of those is protection of the habitat and protection of the flow regimes that are conducive to the yellow-legged foothill frog. So in this plot, we're looking at stream flow on the left, storage on the right. And this is just kind of a summary of the valve releases we made throughout the April and July period to achieve the UTREP objectives. We had big, large releases, pretty much synchronized with peak inflows. Those ramped down. And we got into a scenario towards middle of June as our recession limb really tumbled steeply down, where we had to ramp down valve releases really as quickly as we could to avoid what we refer to as a large burp of water coming out of the spillway. So that burp of water can be kind of detrimental to breeding frog habitat downstream of Hetchy. And this is a new plot here looking at the operational kind of implementation that Reggie has spun up for both the open loop and ASO informed PRIMS model, but using a 7-day deterministic weather forecast and then climatology appended onto that. And so the main take home here from us was that this really, as far back as May, was pointing us towards there being a lower than expected amount of observed runoff in the system. And that, going back to this slide, really helped us have more confidence in ramping down our valve releases, avoiding a really large purge of water over the spillway, and at the same time filling Hetchy Reservoir. The last series of plots here, these were the formatting for these. You might see tomorrow during Eli Boardman's presentation or throughout the week. Reggie worked with Eli over the last couple weeks just doing some comparisons, and he adopted some formatting Eli's using. And here we're just looking at NSE values against the median ensemble member for our ASO informed PRIMS runs from March through June. And we were encouraged that, especially during these later runs, that the central tendency of those ensembles lined up pretty well with the observed values. So another encouraging result as far as the ability for ASO to inform our more operational modeling tools. So yeah, in summary, thanks so much to the ASO team. We're very excited to be continuing to utilize the ASO data and again, rope that into our operational forecast tools and leverage more information out of the ASO products.
Mark. Wait, real quick, Mark. Dave, the wharf hydro results, we've all discussed that, right? That there's a calibration plus some land surface in there that's requiring updating, and we're working on that. Is that right?
Yeah, up in the headwaters, we have a lot of forest. We have a lot of forest being characterized there with active soils, and I think, as you all know, it's pretty much bedrock with a few trees sticking out of it, and so there's some recharacterization of the model land cover specification there that needs to happen.
Right.
Yeah. That's on the docket for this summer.
Great. Mark.
Thanks, Harrison. That was really interesting. This is more just a comment. Never heard detrimental burping. So now I know what that is. That's all I got.
Others? Matt Meadows.
So I was going to respond to the detrimental burping. Same thing that we're trying to do. You're trying to fill it up, and you have to live with some sort of risk at that fill up time. So what is the risk? His risk is frogs. My risk is, people downstream. People can probably put their own decision on who's at more risk. I'm saying probably the frogs, but I think we run the same type of situation. You're trying to fill up. How much, when you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 days of forecast, what can you risk in that kind of fill up burp? That's one thing with the modeling.
Yeah, and the flip side of that scenario was the concern that there was a lot more snow coming down the hill, and that we were going to kind of get overrun on the spillway. But ASO helped that.
All right. Mark again.
I'm slow to put pieces together. This is kind of from Harrison and kind of from your talk, Matt, but is that better?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, so kind of from both of you, but Matt, it occurred to me with your the King's Cross, and actually Scott asked me about this. That last point this year that's causing the curve was you were pulling the Ice Nobel SWE volume for that date. There wasn't a flight right then. Is that correct? Yeah, so that could be a source of some of the hump. Again, this is less Harrison and more Matt, but uncertainty, certainly some uncertainty in the model values at that time. So just lobbing it out there.
Kat, were you saying that Grayson had a question? Oh, okay. You were just pointing at Grayson. All right. All right. Thanks a lot. All right. So Molly, I'm going to turn it over to you, but so this is our posterless poster session, and that was much celebrated last year as a time for people to really get to talk and mix around. So do we have the snacks are in the works? Okay. All right. All right, great. So over to you.
All right. Thanks, Tom. And thank you, everyone. That's the conclusion of our second day presentation-wise.